the discussions. Welcome my students as well, and any questions you have of them. They are it's a class in criminal justice, and we're teaching juvenile justice tonight. And we deal with those issues out there in Chicago, and we're dealing with these issues here tonight. So thanks again for this opportunity.
You're very, very welcome, Dr. Senja. I know there's a lot more that you're going to contribute to the discussions tonight. I'm looking forward to that. But I want to go over to Mr. Simeon Joseph. As you know, as I said before, Simeon is someone who's well known as an educator. He's a member of the WCC Committee's program to overcome violence. He's also an executive member of Peace to the City Campaign. He's a member of the Interdenominational Committee on Crime and Violence, also a member of the CCC Commission to Haiti on Youth and Violence, also coordinator of a regional study on threats to life in the Caribbean from 1995 to 1997. He also collaborated with Dr. Senja, I believe he did, on a crime and violence study in Dominica, and is a member of the WCC Committee on a program to overcome violence, and also executive member of a Peace to the City program. But just before I go over to you, so these are well-known qualifications and experiences that you have there, Simeon, but you're really most known as an educator in Dominica, and very well loved as an educator in Dominica as well. Just before I go over to you, let's just shout out a few of your associates in South Africa, in Switzerland, in Sri Lanka, and all over the world. We know they're everywhere, and I know there's so many people who are with us. Already people have started coming out on Facebook, and so we'll greet them and shout them out a little later on. I just want to just shout out everybody who's on with us tonight. So Simeon, a good shout out to your friends and your associates out there. Let me just go over to you, Simeon, so you can get the ball rolling if you're opening remarks.
Okay, well, Sheridan, thanks a lot for having me on the program tonight. Dr. Senja, good to see you again, Dr. George. And I want to allow me to deviate a little, Sheridan, on two matters. First of all, to congratulate Dr. Senja on his Peaceology City. I wish to tell him that I think this is very timely, relevant, needed, and appropriate in Dominica as we seek to traverse that landscape of crime and violence that seem to be plaguing us in various ways. Also, too, I think it would be remiss of me if I did not tonight recognize the number of young people from the north of Dominica. I hail from the north of Dominica, who did so well in the Caribbean Examinations Council exams. We are very proud of our young people to see that so many of them, again, I would underscore, particularly from the north, did so well in the CXC exams. I cannot not congratulate my very good friend, Pastor Bacchus. Is a gentleman I know so well. It's a gentleman who taught me a very consoling phrase, which I have developed as my mantra, and it goes like this: I'm too blessed to be stressed and too anointed to be disappointed. having said so, I think our topic is very timely tonight, coming on the heels of the recent murders that we experienced in Dominica. I would say the unfortunate death of our prominent businessman, long-standing businessman, someone who has contributed to the economy of Dominica, Mr. Roll, and also to, without any less significance, the murder of the two young men, a very gruesome murder we saw happening last week, of this young man's body lying in a shed somewhere in Marigot. No one should meet the end of their life that way. And not long after, we saw another stabbing death of a young man in Marigot because of altercations. So when we examine all of those situations and we recognize where we are today, we realize, and we have to begin our conversation from the point of view of what are the threats to life that we see today. Life has been given to us by the Almighty as a source of, as the essence. You know, I cannot help but refer in my mind back to that scriptural phrase where Christ said, I have come that you may have life and have it to the full. And how is it that some people are deprived of that fullness of life in various forms, to the extent that another can have so much disrespect for the other that they see it fit to be responsible, to take ownership of the giving of life and to take it away. So that is very frightening. We also, in saying so, we have to ask ourselves, we must ask ourselves, it is imperative upon us to ask ourselves, what are the traditions and situations that have built up those threats to life that we see today? How has our society come to the point where we think that life is not important? And so we have to ask ourselves, what traditions have we perpetuated, have we developed, have we followed, and what situations have we built up that so threaten life as we see it? And then we also have to look at how do these threats to life, how are they expressed in our local situation, in the Dominic of today? Apart from just people taking away their life, what are the other threatening elements to life that we see? Social, the economic, the political, even the religious situations. How are these threats expressed in our local situation today? Then that should further invite us to examine what is our purpose for challenging and transforming this culture of violence that we seem to be developing into a culture of, okay? So we have to look at what is the reality of the Dominic of today. How do our parents feel about their children going to school? How do our women feel about walking the streets of Roseau? How do our business people feel about opening their businesses and being safe in their homes? And how do our young people undertake the challenge to how you call it, to transform, so to speak, the situations we see in so many of our villages and our streets? Keeping in mind, of course, that crime and violence undermines the quality of our lives. Okay, and I cannot say that enough. Crime and violence undermines the quality of our lives. And as with most failings in our society, it is sometimes the most unfortunate, okay, the vulnerable, the poor, the elderly, the unprotected who suffer the most, okay? And to recognize that people who live in those deprived situations are the ones who are twice likely to suffer the gauntlet of those things. And so to close my opening statement, we need to recognize that rising crime, okay, and we're not only talking about the murders now, because we have several other levels of crime committed, will leave our society feeling powerless and insecure. And we cannot reach that stage in our societal development, in the thrust of our own country's development, where people feel powerless, where people feel insecure, where they reach a stage where they raise their hands in the air and almost feel that because what is going to a derivative of this will be things like vigilante justice, things like revenge killing, things like a very insecure society where people will begin to take the law into their own hands, and we do not want that. And so we need to ensure that we do not reach the stage where we worry that the police themselves become powerless, as it seems now. Okay, and so and where people and the police and the security of the state becomes remote and distant, that is a frightening thing. That where those who have to provide the security and the safety for the country seems powerless, remote, and distant, not available and unable to deal with the issues that concern our neighborhoods, our environment, our families, our villages, and our country.
Very, very well said for your opening salvo there, Simeon. I did not expect anything less from you. You always, hit the nail on the head, always right on the button. And I expect that as the discussions go on tonight, and I can see already we're going to have a very, very vibrant discussion tonight. And I want to also alert Lambi that, Lambi, we will be taking the people's calls tonight. So after the first round of presentations, I will say to you that you'll be able to give the folks the numbers. I'll give you a sign when you can do that. So you can get them the number so they can make a call, and then you'll just give us a sign whenever the call comes. So we'll just go over to you. But I wanted to go over now to Dr. Dion George. Dr. George really needs no introduction whatsoever because, I mean, he has been on this program, on the Global View, on several occasions, and I must say we've had very glowing feedback of his the substance and the quality of his inputs here. Well, let me just tell you a little something about Dr. Dion George, or those of us who might be tuning in for the first time. Dr. Dion George is a lecturer of political science at the university system in the United States. I'm not going to give the name of the university, and is an adjunct instructor of political science at a college in the US as well. He considers teaching as a calling, and one that he takes extremely seriously. He says, it is a personal mantra that keeps me grounded, that can be summed up in 3 words: character, perseverance, and faith. Dr. George exhibits all 3 traits in his professional and personal life. He has had successful teaching careers at 6 higher education institutions in the United States over the past 17 years, including colleges and universities. But prior to his teaching professional career, professorship career, Dr. George completed a Bachelor of Business Administration degree in Computer Information Systems and a master's degree in political science. He has worked as a geographical information system strategist in Addison, Texas. In his capacity as a GIS analyst, he conducted data segmentation, site prospection for new business operations, among other statistical analysis. And outside of the office and the college classroom, Dr. George has devoted himself to serving as a Sunday school teacher at his church. He is the director of religious education at Christ Our Hope Catholic Church in Lithonia. Undoubtedly, and that's in Georgia, in Atlanta, Georgia. Undoubtedly, the most important thing in my life, he says, is my faith in God. And I could not live 1 second without being grateful for the graces bestowed on me to serve. Dr. George earned his doctoral degree at Clark Atlanta University in 2019. He has since taught courses such as American government, constitutional law, global politics, international relations, and public administration at the university level. Currently, Dr. George has and he's on the verge of publishing 2 books, one on Caribbean development and the other on intergovernmental relations. Quite an impressive resume, I must say. But just before I go over to Dr. George, I heard Simeon mention that he is a guy who was from the North and he was bigging up some of the students in Portsmouth who did well. I mean, the students, congratulations to all of those students, especially those in Portsmouth. They school did extremely well, but many students all over did extremely well. I'm very proud of our students in Dominica who had been working under very adverse conditions, you know, during this COVID situation. And many of them, in fact, many of them did not even have all what was required to be able to, you know, to do well, and yet they persevered and they did extremely well. So I just want to say this, that Simeon, you also want to remember the little man, because today I felt was some kind of historical day in Dominica, in the sense that there's a young man, his name is Julius Gabriel, and he is very affectionately known as Handbag. And I understand he's put his name in the ring to go up against a lot of giants in a by-election in Grand Bay. This man really is epitomizing the spirit of all these guys who went before him, who liberated the Grand Bay. And so this man is showing so much guts and courage. Everybody is wondering, where was this guy all the time? A little man, but he looks like he speaks very well the people's language, and he's an expert in the Creole language. And I listen to this man, his songs, and I've never heard more Creole and better Creole than that. He promises to introduce Creole in the parliament if he wins the seat. So let's see whether he will win or not. And if that happens, whether in fact the Speaker of the House will allow Creole to be spoken in the parliament. I'm not sure it's permitted at this time, but I mean, we'll see what happens. But anyway, I just want to congratulate this young man just because he's just an ordinary young man, a bus driver who lobbied for bus drivers and to get a stimulus, and they got it. And nobody really saw him as a leader. So it's good to recognize little people when they do big things. And this is just an ordinary man that is trying to do something very extraordinary. Just want to shout out to him and his team and to all of the candidates who are going up for the Grand by-election. And Dr. Dion George, I want to go over to you now so you can make your opening remarks. Yes, tonight. Over to you, Dr. George.
All right, good evening, Mr. Gregoire. Thank you very much for your invitation on such a timely topic. Good evening to my panelists, Dr. Serge and Mr. Simeon. Lambi, good evening to you, of course, Showin, and to our listeners at home and abroad. Wonderful good evening. Of course, these conversations are always healthy, and my personal mantra is I hope that it enlightens our people, and we want the best for our country that we so dearly love. And so whenever we have those conversations, I always want to invite the Holy Spirit to guide it and let it be productive for what it's worth. And so with that, I want to say thank God. But I want to start off with a Bible scripture in Moses chapter 5, verse 34. And because we're talking about crime and governance and how we can perhaps deal with that, it says here in chapter 34 in Moses that Cain was rebellious and he loved Satan more than God. And out of his selfishness and in a fit of jealousy, he rose up and slew his brother Cain. And the Lord asked him, where is your brother Abel? Where is your brother Abel? And in his arrogance, he told God, and we all know what he said. He says, am I my brother's keeper? And tonight, I want to start with that. We are each other's keeper, right? And so in the beginning, I heard Dr. Serge mention something. I thought that was very poignant to the fact that there is not a monolithic view of any solution, that there is autonomy in persons and there is self-governance. And in fact, in the Bill of Rights of the United States Constitution, and even in the preamble of Dominica Constitution as well, it speaks of self-governance and restrictions of government and the need for persons to petition the government, to have protections from the government, and to really do what it takes to agitate for good governance. And that should not be a critic of the government, but it should be integral part of what good governance is. And so I just want to have it as a beginning statement. But the other things I think I would like to talk about tonight, and of course have a discussion with, some of them would include what are the causes of crime? Just some general view that psychologists has had, criminologists, of course, would have researched, sociologists, and even political scientists who have views as to what are some of the causes of crime. And then I would like to talk about some of the situation of Dominica judicial system as to where it stands and what can we do to make it better. And then as the night goes on, I would like to reference some statistics, specific statistics that gives a trend analysis of the homicide rates in the Caribbean and Latin America, some selected countries. And specifically, I would like to give like a 5-year analysis of some of the crime statistics in Dominica and where we are. And finally, I would like to talk about the role that governments play in such an important topic, because it matters to us as a people. And so just beginning, just to point out, one of the reasons for crime, which most social scientists, including criminologists and social scientists, political science, sociology, they would agree that poverty do plays a part, right? And I mean, there are calypsos that talk about a man who leave his daughter, a man who go and steal, that he would steal to feed his family, right? And so we can talk about that more in length. But another one is peer pressure, and where people are unemployed and persons can influence them to act otherwise. Persons sometimes fall into that trap. But there's something that I think is something that is a healthy thing to discuss, is Dominica specifically, is the use of alcohol. I'm not sure where I got that statistic from. I think it is a video I saw, and I think they mentioned that Dominica ranks in the top 5 as the happiest people in the world. But somewhere along in that very same video, I think it says that Dominica ranks top 4 as the people who consume the most alcohol per capita. And I think that's very striking. Now, I have not verified that information, but if that's the case, it's very, very striking, because we know what is the side effects of alcohol and drugs. And absolutely, that can play a part. But undoubtedly, from my own studies as a political scientist, politics itself plays a tremendous role where there is a failure and where there are disgruntled sides. One recalls right here in the Caribbean, Michael Manley and Edward Siega, and the amount of violence that had back then. Guns being imported into the Caribbean, and if you remember the story as it goes, Bob Marley was even shot. And the same night he was shot, after coming from the medical center, he came on stage. And we all saw that picture where he raised his hand and he called it two politicians together. And so the point here is that politics can and does and have actually played a tremendous role in dividing a people. And so hopefully tonight the conversation can touch on the importance of our governments, including the opposition and other parties, being very cognizant of that fact, but also religion as a cause of violence. The United States Commission on International Religious Freedom in 2020 noted that Christians in Burma, in India, in Iran, in North Korea, Pakistan, and Russia, and Saudi Arabia, they have been persecuted and killed and labeled. And there are people who have been killed and persecuted for their faith. Now, thank God, I have not ever heard that in Dominica, but who is to say that these things cannot happen? You know, people get to be fanatics. And of course, there's this very general argument as to who is to be blamed. Is it the society or is it the individual? And so there is this view of sociology versus psychology. And so someone might be suffering some perhaps mental illness, and that would fall under the psychological part of the argument. And then there are others who would argue, no, it's the fact that there is unemployment, there is poverty, and there is this politics. And there are others who would argue it's sociological factors. And there is this divide, this dichotomous argument as to where is it coming from. Now, it might well be that there is a balance between both of them. But that's just something I think I would just throw out there as an opening statement. And the other thing I would like to point out is that in 2020, I did some research, and it says that in Latin America and the Caribbean, for several years now, homicide rates per 100 inhabitants that Jamaica has been leading. And it says that homicides per 100 inhabitants per year is like 46.5 in Jamaica, Venezuela, 45.6, Honduras, 37.6, Trinidad and Tobago, 28.2. But then I said, okay, that's interesting. And then I moved to Dominica, and I'm looking at our statistics right here in Dominica, and please pay attention here. It says here that Dominica crime rate and statistics for 2014 was 12.66, a 49.62% increase from 2011. It also says that the crime rate in Dominica in 2015 was 12.64, a decline from 2014. But guess what? In 2016, it was 22.44, which is a 77.45% increase from 2015. And then the last statistic I got was 2017. It says that it was 26.59, an 18.5 increase. And so the trend here generally is an increase. It's an increase, and that is something to be concerned about. And I guess in this opening statement, one of the last things I would like to come back to is the question of, does it matter with governance? Is there I would not be as bold to say a causation, but is there a correlation? Can one see some data that one might not say caused it, but is it correlated? And I will tell you that in Atlanta right now, that there is this governor election, and the previous governor, who has resigned, by the way, her name is Lance Bottom. She resigned, and I think one of the main issue, but of course Atlanta has a rising housing situation, But the main issue was crime and violence. And the referendum as to who would be elected is the whole issue of crime. So there is this last guy, his name is Kasim Reed. There's another guy who was ex-military, a former police officer, he's contending. And so the main issue here is crime. And so I think, like Mr. Simeon said, that this topic is very timely, notably the killings that we have had recently. But independent of that, I mean, for the best of our nation, I think, Mr. Gregoire, you have persons here. And by the way, I look forward to the students' participation as well to have this discussion. So I think that's what I will say for now. Thank you.
All right, and thanks a lot for that, Dr. George. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought when you spoke about the race in Atlanta, you spoke about Lance Bottom. I think she was mayor, right? Not governor.
Mayor, thank you.
So I think she resigned as mayor. So there's a mayor's race that is coming on.
Mayor, you're 100% correct. Thanks.
So yes, we're looking forward to see what is the result of that, because
Yeah.
crime is definitely one of the major items there in that discussion. But Dr. Senja, as I go back to you to continue the conversation, and that's before we go to Lambi, I noticed John has joined in. I'm not sure if it's one of your students that has joined us, but so you let me know if it is, so we can welcome your student if it is. So let me go over to you, Dr. Senja. Your mic is muted, so you might need to unmute your mic.
Yes, well, I'm not sure what John's last name is. I have a John in here. It might be my John. So maybe I'll see him. It's probably one of my students named John as well. Probably just wants to come early.
Well, if he is, then he could in fact just unmute his mic and say hello, so we can greet him.
John, are you there? John, is that you? John, can we see you if you're there? Is that our John?
Yes, can you hear me?
Okay, all right. It's all right. You don't want to be on video. That's all right if you just want to say your voice. Well, thanks for joining in. I guess I didn't announce extra credit, but you're probably making a campaign for some extra credit, huh? Well, tell your other classmates to come on in. And if you ever want to come down in Madison in 1, we're in Madison 1 tonight. So if you ever want to come down early, the classroom is open. Thanks for joining. All of our students are interested, criminal justice majors, interested in becoming police officers, lawyers, social workers. John is one of the great ones, and it's glad to see him.
Dr. Sergeant, let me just extend a very, very warm welcome to John and any of his students and colleagues that might join us here tonight. We hope they're all listening, and we hope they might learn something from the conversation that we're having here tonight. I have to tell you, however, that I did attempt to reach out to our police commissioner, and he was very gracious, and I sent him an email and asked him whether he could make someone available, because I thought it would have been good to have somebody in law enforcement or the judiciary on the panel here tonight to give that side of the story. And I did send him an email, and it was very short notice. Then I did speak to him on Monday morning, and he made an effort. I mentioned ASP Claude Weeks, who is in fact designated as the official in community policing in Dominica. He did indicate that Mr. Claude Weeks was in fact on sick leave. And so that was the case. And so I did ask him to see whether he could make someone else, a senior officer, maybe somebody in the criminal investigation department available. It was a short notice, and I probably he was not able to get someone on time. So it would have been very nice. So I just want to shout out to the police commissioner, Daniel Carbon, to tell him thank you for making the effort. And we were delighted to speak with him on Monday morning. And we're hoping at some point somebody might become available, because we really want to assist with whatever crime problems that may exist down there. So certainly we'd be very happy to keep the door open. So at any time you wish to send somebody, we'd be very, very happy to welcome them. But Dr. Senja, let me go over to you.
Yeah, well, that is encouraging, because and by the way, Mr. Wicks is following me on Facebook Live, and maybe he was too sick to come to be at work and to represent work. But if he's feeling better and he has something to say on Facebook, I'll be happy to translate whatever Mr. Wicks wants to say to me. He's I would say he's a close friend of mine, but he's also a close collaborator. We have collaborated on works together on the ground, and so the current police chief, Mr. Carbon. Even if I have said some statements of Mr. Carbon's governance as police officers, that's probably much of it probably because I hold him to such a high standard. Because when we started community policing in Grand Bay, it was Sergeant Carbon on the ground with Antoine Defoe, acting sergeant, and and inspector, and Mr. Carbon is one of the police officers that was most active in Grand Bay to help community police become what it is. And I've expressed some disappointment of how his great intelligence as a police officer, his maneuvering capability, and his management, the gap that came, because I was expecting to see that great police officer on the ground be that great police chief in that regard. But sometimes the preparations we have in life, in terms of the trainings we have for positions, sometimes it takes us a while, to get to learn administrative positions. So hopefully Mr. Carbon is at the point after those years where he could be better. He could, at least from my eyes, or the things I've criticized him about in terms of not using enough science in policing, sometimes too many wrong pegs and square holes. These are things that I'll tell Mr. Carbon to his face. He's a friend of mine, and friends don't hide to say things. And to see the police department be less political, or at least too many accusations or what appears to be political involvement, even if it's not, because it's not only what we do, but what we appear to be doing. And some people who say that Mr. Carbon would shy away from the press, especially one like Q95, it is encouraging to hear that he would be, and I would be happy, I'm not teaching on Mondays or so, but I'll be happy if there's a time that I can join in dialogue, because I actually am craving a reunion with Mr. Carbon, because we did so well in Grand Bay together. I mean, we had a team up there, Defoe, and a lot of those Coffee Williams and Claude Weeks and Mills, a lot of these guys. So I look for the point where I'm not seen as persona non grata, because I am very critical of everyone. But when I was in Grand Bay and I criticized Edison James, I said I was a laborite, and then after when Pierre Charles won and I was working with Blackmore, of course I'm a laborite. But then when Roosevelt Skerritt and others came in, and I started to have critical things to say about the safety of our community, and give factual criticism about the things I say as assessment, it's been personal non grata. So I'm glad to hear that it is good. It is good news. It was good for me to hear, Dr. George, talk about these causations of crime. And if I were, I just want to add a couple things. That in the beginning of sociology, in fact, criminology began and sociology began at the University of Chicago, in the United States, the first department where I did my doctoral studies, right? And, we still try to advance, and Chicago is the city, ironically, with one of the highest levels of crime, is the most studied city in the world. So in criminology, when we think about crime, one of the earliest theories is the classical theory. And the classical theory of crime says that human beings are rational actors. We choose the cost and benefits of our actions. And when the costs are too high, we will less likely commit crime. And when the benefits are higher, we will more likely commit crime. So if human beings are rational actors that will choose the cost and benefits to commit an action, the best recipe, according to classical theorists, is punishment. Because if you punish someone and you make the punishment should be three things. It should be swift, it should be certain, and it should be severe. But if you over punish, you will lose your face. And if you under punish, of course, you'll be taken as a joke. So how do you punish correctly? Foucault and others and many scholars have written about how do you punish correctly. Spare the rod child, spoil the child. You have the code of Hammurabi. You have lex talionis. Someone slaps someone or cut their hand, you cut their hands off. Someone kills someone, you cut their neck off. You have a whole science of those ideas. Then we have the neoclassical theory that says that not all human beings are rational actors that choose the cost and benefits of their actions. There are some people who are called feeble-minded, like a little child that might trip you and throw you down the stairs and you fall and you die. Will you punish that child the same way that you would with a 25-year-old or someone with good mind, right? There are people who have Barrett syndromes. There are people who are actually in poverty, who have PTSD, that their minds are they're not rationally thinking. So therefore, that's sometimes where we have manslaughter, we have second-degree murder, we have first-degree murder, which is intentional homicide that has mens rea, which is criminal intent. I want to kill someone, I go out, I see you, and I kill you. And there are sometimes negligible homicides, people that do things, because they're not thinking about it, they cause harm. And there's manslaughter. I went out to harm you, but I didn't mean to kill you. And then we have the positive theory that tells us that that we have to use science. We have to use science to understand crime and violence. Very interestingly, in the early days of thinking about what causes crime, Cesar Lambrasso, for example, would study the shape of the skull, and they would say someone with a bumpy head like mine, they're probably there's something with the head that would tell the likelihood that I would be a criminal because of the type of head that I have or so. And you have another guy named Sheridan who studied body types. He says the ectomorph, the endomorph, or the mesomorph. If someone is big and strong, they're most likely involved in a lot of physical crimes. A lot of guys who are mushy and soft are more likely to be pedophiles because they are concerned about their looks and they want to lure men or women, so they use candies and nice words to lure you in. And you have guys who are thin and wiry who might be thieves because they can climb through the little windows and they could run away very quickly. You know, it's very often that we say that we have to make a distinction between violent crime, causes of violent crime, and property crime and political crimes, right? Not all crimes do not come from the same source. And violent crimes oftentimes come from inability to resolve conflicts from very basic ways, to inability to resolve conflict without violence, and a buying into the idea that violence is a legitimate way to solve conflict, right? Whereas property crime is often like robbery and burglary is oftentimes associated with economic gains and wanting to, hit a lick or get some opportunities, right? And then we have battery, some of the street crimes and so that happen to just sometimes petty crime, and prostitutions are crimes of economy and those types of things. The point I want to make is that there is no one answer of what causes crime because crime is so diverse. So when we come to the notion of what we are seeing in Dominica, where so many young people are victims or perpetrators of crime and otherwise, we say, how should we think in the Dominica context? Crimes happen, violent crimes primarily happen when people use violence to resolve conflicts, because you don't use violence to get lunch, you use it to get back. And the question is that some people do not just start off by killing. Sometimes the people who start to kill, sometimes you hear a lot of murmurs about things that happen. From the way that I read it through the media and some persons I spoke, it appears to me that Mr. Roll had sought help for conditions that were affecting him. And this thing escalated, and this senior citizen, wealthy senior citizen, decided to take the law in his hands decided to try to get justice for himself and protect himself by confronting the person to hopefully maybe reduce the tension. And in the process of doing that, he lost his life. And the confrontations we saw in Marigot are not without history. That person say, "Kaso mi se ke tue ou sav kaso, mi se di ke tue, mi se ke tue moun kaso, mi se ke toujou ka pase chime avè kout la," right? By the way, Felix Henderson told me, and Jamala told me, I am an honorary Gambarian as well. So, so mani ko pale patwa moun di mo so jagwa be, moi jagwa be, mais moi commence pale gwa pime patwa agwa be, right? So hopefully I'm back and really bring that in Parliament. I would like to see that, as well. So Mr. G, without taking up too much more time, there are a lot of ideas. Tonight, when my students come in, we're studying juvenile justice. And we see that one of the things that juveniles do not have in the United States is the right to a jury. Why don't they have a right to the jury? Because the jury determines guilt and innocence. And when we think about young people committing crime, we think about them making mistakes and how society should stand up. So you don't need a jury for them because it's not about finding them guilty. So hopefully I can, we can help with overlaying some of those causes. But I was glad that Dr. George started. It kind of gave me an excuse to do this because I just started talking about the intellectuals, and hopefully we can build from that. Because part of what I know you try to do, Mr. G, is to help us educate the public. And persons who listen to me always like the opportunity that we have some level of education that comes in the process. And then very quickly, I will end by saying that if someone is not resolving conflict peacefully, what are the sources? Dr. George started out with the Bible. What are the ideologies from your home, from your community? And were there accelerants of violence in your system? Are you intoxicated now, or have you been so intoxicated for so long that your mind is not functioning the way that it should? We can talk a lot about the alcoholism issue. I mean, my friends in Trafalgar, my colleagues that hang out, I don't want to blame Water Bar, because it's not just Water Bar, we have a bunch of other places, but a lot of us sit in those rum shops, and it's amazing what happens with alcohol. So it's good that for us to talk about those factors that reduce our inhibitions, but we also need to have the strong values that allow us to hold tight so we can promote more peaceful lives.
And thanks a lot for that additional remark. I know you have a lot more, and I know you're trying to save some time and allowing others people to speak. But I know, Dr. Senja, that when you come back, you will go over some of those old talking points, like the need for better systematic approaches to understanding and addressing crime and violence issues in Dominica, and further interrogating the connections among life stresses and so on, and youth development, family dynamics, poverty, and so on. I would hope that you would, in fact, do a lot more work. I know you have done so much on all of those talking points already. So I really hope that you can help a lot of our listeners by going over many of those things, and your students as well, because I'm sure that these are some of the things that they will be encountering in their courses. But I want to go over to Simeon now. And Simeon, let me just alert Lambi that maybe I should just allow you, Lambi, to just give our listeners the numbers, give them the numbers that they can call as we go along. And maybe when they start making some calls, you can just make us a sign that they're ready, and then I will allow you to interrupt me, so you can do that. But give out the numbers, and then I'll go over to Simeon. And let's hear you, Lambi. We're not hearing you now.
The numbers are 449-3095, 449-3096, 449-3097, 616-4257, and the overseas access number is 305-432-9624.
All right, so there you have it. There are the numbers. So Simeon, let me go over to you. I believe our callers will start making some calls later on. So I know you have a lot more to add to this, a lot more value, especially you're very familiar with what's going on in the local situation. You've worked with Dr. Senja, you've worked with so many international agencies, worked with the church and maybe church committees. Give us some more of your experiences and your knowledge. But just before I go over to you, let's take a call, because Lambi seems to have a caller, Simeon. Let's take a call, Lambi.
Good evening, caller. Thanks for joining us. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Lambi. Good evening to you and Mr. G and the cast of intelligent men that you all have there tonight. Sheridan, this is Mr. Rossi tonight.
How are you doing?
I'm glad you have this subject tonight, because Matt had a show, I think last week, about the rate of crime and the kind of heinous crimes that you're starting to see. And I suggested to him the same people that you have in there, a sociologist, criminologist, and these kind of people with no ties to any government party, to explain to the people the cause and effect of crime. And I'd like to say thanks to Dr. George from Salisbury, for Dion, for putting it out there, because Dr. Simeon just went in a general manner, and he came back and kind of piggyback on Dion's thing. But I want to just commend you guys for having that subject, because it's a timely subject. It is a subject that I think you need to do 2-3 more times, that it can sink in and it will get across to some people who are not really too keen on some of the part, the cause and the effect, and the political ramification, the poverty and all the situation that Dr. Judge explained. But here I want to bring to Dr. Senja something he mentioned in the first part of his introduction, that there was a presentation that the Prime Minister made in Canada. And he said everybody depended on one man to create jobs, and everybody is looking at him because, Mr. Senja, he created a situation like we have now. He has set that system up that everybody has to come to him. So for him to be on a foreign soil, making a statement like that, he's not being honest to himself and the people that he governs. But I'm listening, because there's so much good information so far that has been said. I'm enjoying the conversation tonight. It's very pertinent, and I'm not going to add too much, because you all have covered most of what I've had to say, and I'm listening, my brother. Thanks for that, man.
Right, and thanks a lot for your intervention. Appreciate that.
Mr. G, if I may just say that, just for a point of clarification, That was in 2005, 2006. That was in the very early stages of Prime Minister Skerritt's tenure. And what he said then, and if I look in my archives, I can probably find the video if anybody tries to challenge me. What he said then at that time was that so many, and not everybody, because I try to avoid extreme words like everybody, nobody. So he said too many people, exactly, too many people rely on one person for jobs, the Prime Minister of Dominica, right? So it seems that, I mean, we have self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Like sometimes my point was that if you identify that, what did you do to change the culture? What have you done or still doing? And I mean, he probably has ways that he'll defend himself. And then my idea, and there are ways that someone may not accept his defense. But my point was that we can also say that too many people are relying on the police for safer communities. Let us do more ourselves. And that's why Dr. George mentioned about governance. And if I may make the point, one of my recent publications, I sent it to you, Mr. G, that talks about the very same thing that Dr. George talks about, and asks the question, is there a connection between politics and crime? And the resounding answer is yes. And it can go both ways. In fact, political forces can actually create environments where crime conditions are reduced, right? In the United States, we have in Erie County, we have a Cook County Kim Foxx, who in one of the chief attorneys, and she was a major stalwart behind the decriminalization of marijuana, because there are so many Black and brown people that were going to prison for a little bit of weed that they were trying to deal with public health issues. And the politicians changed the laws to allow a little bit of marijuana to be used medicinally and actually have decriminalized marijuana in the case. And so you have less arrests for that, you have less stigmatization. And as strange as it may sound, a lot of crime came because through the legalization of marijuana. During Prohibition, we know that alcohol was illegal in the United States, and we had so many deaths. We have a lot of deaths because of use of alcohol, but we had deaths from the speakeasies and so on, right? So that's very important. But one of the things I said in the chapter, Mr. G and others, is that there is we have a mode that we call like winning at all costs, winning elections at all costs, or another thing that I call ideal victory, right? So the idea of winning at all costs is to stay in power for as long as we want to. And Dr. Peters, the president of the University of Dominica State College, Donald Peters, in his book, he mentions that one of the things that happens in the Caribbean is that the politicians oftentimes do not have much of a career before. So they may get the career, like we saw a few exceptions. The politics is the job. So they oftentimes get a job to give a job to the people who gave them the job. So it is a recipe for perpetual stay in office and almost winning at all costs. What I argued is that we have to distinguish between a victory and a win, right? So the victory is something bigger than just the win. You win the election, but do you win the peace? Do you win the crime reduction? Do you win the economic development? Do you win the decency? Do you win the confidence in the people? I'm a soldier of the United States Army. I'm still a classified level functioning person. And we say that war is for peace. It's a kind of a weird paradox. But there is something called the Pyrrhic victory, which is whether or not the victory was actually worth the fight. Because after you fight so much, somebody wonder what was the benefit of fighting. And when we go, there is this military victory and there's the strategic victory. We may win the combat, but are we going to win the peace, right? So it's very important that even when politics unfolds, are you cheating? Are you participating honestly? Are you giving democracy a fair chance to unfold? And if you're doing that, when you win, you're likely to get a victory, because not only do you win what you wanted, you also uplift the machinery of democracy that allows of the people, for the people, and by the people. So I just wanted to add that there as we were talking about the connections, and we can tease a little more, because I had 9 propositions or so that I made to see how do we move from what seems to be a winner take all or seems to be a winning at all costs, and how that relates to violence, as we see in Jamaica and as we see in St. Lucia, as we see in Venezuela and some places, or as we can have more for model that I refer to as ideal victory.
And yes, of course, Simeon, and I'm pretty sure that you can add a lot to that because some of the questions that Dr. Sanger has raised. I mean, yes, you win, but I mean, is the economy making is there any change in the economy? Is there any change in the social standing? I mean, is there a change in the level of poverty or the level of unemployment
Yes.
or the level of exports? You know,
Well, let me just tap into a number of keywords that were mentioned tonight. We heard the word values mentioned, okay, by Dr. Seja. We've heard the word governance mentioned. We've heard the word politics mentioned. But stemming from the last point that was made, winning at all costs, if you use a reductionist approach, you could reduce that to someone who says, okay, I want to furnish my house and I will steal at any cost. Does that mean that because your house is fully furnished, that you have worked hard and earned the necessary income to furnish your house, right? Then, so we can translate this winning all cost approach or mentality to so many other things, which cheapens the whole thrust to become better people. Because as Dr. Session says, you can win, but do you really have the victory? And so yes, so crime can be reduced to many areas of winning. We have won this. We have won a preponderance of drugs. We have won a preponderance of winning at any cost, of corruption at any cost, of stealing at any cost. But at the end of the day, even if you have earned those things, even if you have the most drugs, the most guns, the most money, the most furniture in your house, what kind of victory is that if it is cheaply earned? Okay, so that is just one thing. Now, as I said, let me just tap into the whole political debate about crime and violence. Dr. Seja is the criminologist and the sociologist. I remember when I was studying sociology in Jamaica, for instance, I was very much exposed to someone by the name of Delroy Chuck. Okay, he was a criminologist, he was a lawyer, and I worked with him because when I did my research on crime and violence in downtown Kingston, one of my research paper was poverty and poor parenting. And how does that lead to crime and violence? Okay. And it was very revealing to me the connection between poverty, poor parenting, and crime and violence. All right. Now, having said so, we can relate the causes of crime and violence to many, many, many things. First of all, when we look at the value question, it has to be derived from a look at the statistics. Let's just say that off the bat. Now, I think, right? When crime, when the fear of crime is actually greater than the crime itself, we are in trouble. I'm not sure if you understand what I'm saying, right? When the fear of crime is actually greater than the crime itself, we are in trouble. That will usher in a sense of insecurity. Okay. Now, should we be blind to the fact that disorder and violence have become a fact of our daily life in so many of our communities? Should we be blind to those things? Because you see, a murder and gross incidents of crime are symptoms of things in the wider society. Okay, and to what extent are our government officials, how do they cite these problems that are happening in our society and the steady decline in crime over the last years, for instance? Are they cognizant of that? Because it seems to me that sometimes it brushes over the head and people, I remember a certain senior police officer, let me give you a situation I had way back in 1996 when I was part of the drug abuse task force. And we met with the then Attorney General, the Minister of Home Affairs, and the then Commissioner of Police. And by then, we already had drugs used in our schools. And when we met with these people, they said, we don't have a drug problem in Dominica. Drugs were in our schools. And they said we did not have a drug problem in Dominica. That's way back in 1997. And I recall that meeting was held on Friday, the 1st of May, 1997. Okay? And at that time, Matthew, as I said, the use of drugs was already present in our schools. And so when you do it, does it mean that we have to have a preponderance of crime before we admit that there is indeed crime and violence in our society? And I've also heard it said that Dominica has fewer murders than other countries. Do we need to have 5 and 10 people being killed on our streets every day before we recognize that there is a problem? And so we need to ask ourselves, to what extent are our government officials ready to admit and to cite the steady decline of our societal structure and the rising crime? Dr. Dion George gave us some frightening comparative statistics just in the recent past 6 and 7 years. So we need to ask ourselves, what is the situation in Dominica with burglary and car crime, okay, and drugs and robbery, sexual and domestic violence, right, and violent crime? We need to ask those questions. No, we cannot look at that without examining two key issues, because I want to focus on life. And I'm happy to know, Dr. Dion, that we share a lot of similar interests, being a catechist, being involved in our church, and like a Catholic like myself. And I'm happy to know that. And I connect with you all the way in Atlanta there, okay? And I'm happy to know that. But you see, at the heart
I also connect with you from right here as well.
right. But you see, at the heart of an understanding of crime and violence has to be the value of life. How is life cherished? How is life appreciated? Okay. How do we evaluate? How do we appraise life in all its forms? And so, if we are to appraise life to its fullest, we have to look at two areas of the value question, which Dr. Seja alluded to: respect and responsibility. And allow me to touch on that to some extent. Because when we look at crimes, we have to think that there are many factors, right, which contribute to the breakdown of law and order in our society. In many ways, we can ask the police, the courts, and the prison service are simply right now picking up the pieces of other people's failures, the failures of parents, the failures of our education system, the failures of our church, the failures of our government, the failures of our social system, right? And so as a society, we need to ask, are we in danger of being overrun by values which eat away at people's respect for themselves, each other, their homes, and their neighborhood? And that is a key question that must be asked. Are we in danger? I'm going to ask, like, are we in danger of being overrun by values that eat away at people's respect for themselves? When you look at how people move around nowadays, look at the young men in our communities, in our societies, how they carry themselves, how they look. Look at our young women. Look at how people even respect themselves. Now, if someone does not respect themselves, is there any chance of their respecting the other? Because for you to respect the other, you have to have a very high self-esteem of yourself. You have to esteem yourself in order to value and esteem the other and people's homes and our neighborhood. Now, I think what is most damaging of all that has been is the decline in personal responsibility in Dominica. Okay? The decline in personal responsibility. And many people now believe that they are no longer wholly responsible for their actions. People think they can do what they want, with who they want, where they want, anyhow they want. And that is very predominant in our Dominican society today. But basically, when you pass by, you got to shake your heads and ask yourself, or even sometimes you go to church and you have to shake your head right in church, okay? And it's or that people are quick to blame others. It's someone else's fault. It's the environment, it's the economy, society, the government, and even the opposition. Right? Now, what do these excuses do is that they shift the balance away from the mob, the shoplifter, the joyrider, the mugger, and even the criminal, onto someone or something else. And then we need to ask ourselves, what more harmful message could we send than to say it's not our fault, it's society's fault? Because respect and responsibility, respect for self, respect for others, and responsibility for ourselves and our actions is what is going to conscientize us into understanding that we have a responsibility. And that coupled with that, which is even more disturbing, is a misunderstanding or a transposition of the proliferation of rights. I've got my rights, right? People feel that they have rights to curse people on the street, to tell people what they want, to be abusive to persons in their vehicles, that they have rights to put anything on social media, that they have the rights to trample on people's dignity, people's rights, people's personal space, and so forth. And so we have to have a palpable sense of outreach, right? That this so-called human rights, I think, has tipped the balance of justice in favor of the criminal and the wrongdoer, rather than the victim and the law abider. And just to say, very, very in closing, that not in closing rather, but to summarize all of this, to link values with government and politics, I want to propose the following that for us to look at, all right? Because I would like to say that we cannot treat the topic of violence by looking at violence itself, okay? Because there's no smoke without fire, and we need more studies to go deeper into what are the substantial strategies that we can develop to overcome this, and I use the word overcome, this level of violence. And I emphasize here that violence cannot be the starting place for our discussion. If we want to develop an effective process to deal with violence and what is happening to particularly our young males in Dominica, we have to ask the following questions and recognize that violence is a symptom of things gone wrong in our society. Okay? That violence, and I'm glad that it was said, is a cry of the poor who have been left out in this rapid development that is taking place in the world. That violence is the consequence of dreams denied, okay, deferred and snuffed out on behalf of our young people who have been denied opportunities to advance in life. Okay, violence is the consequence of the socio-economic systems where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And I want to recognize it, that to me there is almost the elimination now of the middle class in Dominica. Let us understand that the middle class is the engine of growth of any economy. And that is where the institutional violence comes in. Because you see, with the elimination of the middle class, what you have is a growing gap between rich and poor. And that is why the dependency syndrome comes in, which was spoken about earlier. You will have a dependency syndrome when you have that kind of political patronage and dependency. Because without a strong, stable sector of the population to drive the economy, those below will only be begging from those at the top. Okay? And so we have to understand that violence also is a consequence of the gospel of greed, of materialism, of competition, of aggression and individualism, which has replaced the gospel of life, community, and faith in Jesus Christ. Finally, in just 3 more points, we need to understand that violence among our young people is a consequence of political systems promising but not delivering to the poor and the masses. A lot of promises have been made to people that have not been delivered. And violence is, of course, a consequence of some of the rapid changes that takes place in our homogeneous structure for our education system. While we may celebrate young people excelling at its various forms, let us not forget that there are many young people who fall for the cracks. Many young people who are denied a proper education and access to proper methodologies for teaching. And so we need to understand that when we homogenize the structures in our society, there will always be those who fall on the wayside. And of course, violence is the cry of the poor that filled with unrealistic images and the breakdown of family structures. And so I just want to take from what Dr. Dodd has said and Dr. Seja has said to look at the value question, the responsibility question, and we cannot live out good governance as it relates to, okay, the lowering of crime and the stabilization of our society. There's much more I can say. I want to touch on later on the institutional violence that as it relates to the upper and the lower structures of society. But I'll yield now to our other panelists.
Yes, and I'm very happy we're getting down into the nitty-gritty of the discussion on bringing it home. Before I go over to you, Dr. Dion George, I wanted to see if Lambi wanted to take a couple of calls from our listeners. I know he had a couple of calls a while ago, but I didn't want to disturb Simeon because Simeon was really on a go there and really delivering. Lambi, you want to take any calls now? You can give the people the numbers and see if we want to take a couple of calls now.
Yes, the numbers again are 449-3095, 449-3096, 449-3097, 616-4257, 305-432-9624. We had someone on the overseas line a while ago. Let's see if that person is still there. Caller, are you still around? No, I think we lost that caller.
All right, so let us go on, and when there's another call, Lambi, you can interrupt me so that we can just come to, because we value the contributions of our listeners, and we also want to let Dr. Saint-Jean's students know that we value their presence, and we hope that we will in fact have their own engagement and their contributions as we go along tonight. Dr. Dion George, I know that there's a lot more that you want to add to what you have already contributed here tonight, so let me give you an opportunity to put some more value on all of that.
Well, absolutely, and thank you very much for that opportunity. I think my panelists are really getting into the details of this discussion here. And one of the things I heard Dr. Seja mention is the whole marijuana issue. You know, in the initial opening statements, we mentioned, you know, array of causes for violence, and of course, drug abuse is one of them. And with the United States, compared with, let's say, Dominica, the approach was a little different. You see, when the US started legalizing marijuana, what they did, it is still illegal under federal law. Article 1, Section 8 of the US Constitution spells out what is called the express powers of the legislature. And it does not mention anything about marijuana. However, in the amendments to the Constitution, there is one of the amendments, which is the 10th Amendment. And what it says is this. It says any of the, you want to take a call? You're on mute.
Yep,
Hello?
caller. Yeah,
Yes, let's take a call, Lambi.
yeah, caller, please go
good
ahead.
night, good night.
Go ahead.
Yeah, good night. Very good program. But I'm going to make it short. If the leader of the country says no constitution or no law could prevent him, what do you expect from the young people? And the young people that are idle, have nothing to do. The only thing they don't think about is crime. Thank you.
And thanks a lot for that contribution, caller. You want to take another one before we go, Lambi? Okay, so you will interrupt us when it comes along. Dr. George?
Yeah, thank you so much. And I appreciate the caller and the interaction as well. So I was making a sort of comparison with the implementation of the legalization of marijuana and the whole idea of drug use, right? And so essentially the point is this. Because the US Constitution does not mention marijuana, it's left to the states. And so what we have here is a measured approach toward the legalization of marijuana. And so what people like Barack Obama and the current president have rationalized that if all of a sudden the state of Colorado, for example, or the other state where it's legalized, Washington state, that if it doesn't become a haven for crime, and they're seeing that there are benefits from it, like it's increasing the tax base and so forth, then perhaps the federal government may consider a national legalization of marijuana, which is different from our approach in Dominica. I think we just went ahead and says you can legalize a portion of ounces or stuff like that. I'm not sure if it's just for recreation use. It's not that I'm against somebody having a smoke, but if there is no business agenda to it, I wonder what was the rationale behind that approach. So I just thought I would throw that out there. The other thing I would like to mention is something that our good friend, Mr. Simeon Joseph, made mention of about rights and responsibility. And I think that was very well said. And then the point is, when people talk about they have rights and liberties, the definition of liberty is this, that you have the freedom to do whatever you can as long as that freedom does not infringe on somebody else's freedom. So yes, you could do whatever you want to do, but if by you cursing me in the street and make me feel threatened, then it's not your right. So in other words, to put it another way, these liberties are not absolute. When people say, I can say what I want, no, you can't. Because you might say something about me that is not true, or you may have said something that could incur bad reputation on my character. And then I have a right to protect my name. And so you're very correct. Rights and freedoms, they are relative and there are boundaries to it. So I thought I would mention that. But the other thing I want to talk about in terms of my own thoughts about our discussion here is not only a recognition of the fact that violence is part of our society now, and based on the statistics that we have looked at, that it's on the rise, and of course there is a concern for that, less why we have in this conversation, is how I think we can deal with it. And I wanted to give like 3 main suggestions. Of course, governance is one, but even we as people, as self-governing people, can bring back what I would call the way we grew up. And so I want to mention education, I want to mention sports, and I want to mention a spiritual awakeness. And so where education is concerned, Mr. Gregoire, and to the listening public, I think we should rethink the way we teach our students. I mean, consider, for example, and let me just take the opportunity to actually congratulate those who did so well in CXC. But I mean, amid the COVID virus, teachers cannot expect the same from students. Students are non-fungible. That means they don't learn at the same level. And so we have to move away from, oh, I'm spoon feeding you. You're not spoon feeding any child. What you're actually doing, you are assisting the child, right? And teachers have to be less defensive. If a student say, for example, why did I get that grade? I think it's in the best interest of the teacher to explain to the student why they get that grade, to help build that student and to work with that student, all right? So we have to have a new growth mindset. And I really want to focus on education as one of the means to counteract this violence in our society. But the other one is sports. I recall very well when I used to be in Salisbury, on a Father's Day, I would not let a Father's Day pass without fathers versus non-fathers. In fact, we had a lot of joke about it. They would make joke about guys like myself at the time who had no kids. And they would say, oh man, you're a malpapai, man. You cannot have children and so forth. But we'd have nice Father's Day cricket and so forth. And I think that thing needs to come back in our society. Nice Sunday afternoon crickets. And also the church. I mean, I don't know. I mean, COVID put a little string on us. But it's nice to get people going back and think about God, think about who created them, and to serve God. I think these are basic things outside of government that we as a people can do. Yes, Mr. Gregoire.
Yes, and of course, thanks a lot for that, Dr. George. I wanted to go over to Dr. Saint-Jean because I know, Dr. Saint-Jean, that you might want to welcome some of your students who have joined us. And I know you have a lot more that you'd like to contribute to add to what has been said by both Dr. Dion George and by Simeon. Some of it was such valuable contribution. I think we need to expand and build on some of those as well. So I want to welcome your other students who are now checking in.
Yes, thanks again for the opportunity. And we are under COVID measures, so I have to be COVID compliant. My students all are here with me. Well, not all are here, but those who are here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 of them so far. And we all wear our masks in this context. I wasn't here by myself before. That's why I was without a mask. And I have given them the option. If they want to be on camera, they can be. If they don't want to be, they don't have to be. And I've also given them the encouragement that if they have intelligent questions, that they can earn extra credit. So they may have some questions of you. But when Simeon was making his presentation, his contribution just a little bit earlier, I wanted to remember Bernard Wiltshire, because the last time we had a conversation on this forum with Bernard Wiltshire, he and I get in little pickles every now and then, you know, because we have a great intellectual relationship. You know, we discuss things. And one of the things, if he were here, he'd be talking a lot about, and maybe that's the main thing he'd be saying for the night, is really talking about social bonds, the importance of social bonds to society. You know, we have Emil Durkheim that in the study of suicide that spoke about anime, which is the feeling of numbness, that people feel they do not belong to a broader social structure. So the values and some of the things that Simeon talks about, if they do not feel they belong to the structure, they won't have any tendency to follow any of those kinds of rules or the ways that society really unfolds. Another thing I would expand from what Simeon said is that, remember, we have social control is the capacity of a group to regulate itself according to desired principles and values. So when he's talking about how we manage ourselves, that's in essence part of what we talk about in sociology, criminology, and so on. And when we talk about social control, there are two types of social control. There's formal social control that is from the police, the courts, and corrections, and so on. And there's informal social control that can come from our homes, from our families, and so on. That's important. But one of the things I wanted to do, and my students would probably reprimand the professor if I didn't begin I guess I took the liberty to do that because my students were absent. But the right thing for me to have done is to say, if we are discussing crime and violence, what is a crime and what is violence? By the way, do we have a student that is gonna contribute? What is a crime? What do we say? Anybody wants to contribute to what a crime is? What is a crime? Anybody knows or remembers what we say, a working definition of what a crime is? Right?
Just turn on your mic and go right in.
It's you can just, I will mute mine and you can say, you want to use your mic and tell us what's a crime? Is that it? We have various elements. We do not say it is not a definition, it's a formula. Because a crime is just not anything. Anybody wants to get the first extra credit points for telling us precisely what is a crime? All right, they're looking that up. And the other thing of what is a crime, the next thing is violence. And tonight we were going to talk about violence. And Simeon was saying, what is violence? Now, violence, and in my chapter that I published called, that describes about winning at all costs, that discusses about victory, having victories instead of just wins. I speak about different types of what is violence, right? Violence are acts, behaviors, and thoughts that are contrary to the quality of life of others. So we can have cultural violence, the way that we think and act, because violence can be mental. Actually, believe it or not, if you're thinking untowards about harming someone, that's a violent thought, and you haven't done anything at all, right? There are feelings, there are emotions that actually are violent, because sometimes before someone gets to physical violence, it will emanate from a violent thought, from a violent emotion, and an emotion that is contrary to the quality of life of yourself or others. That's the general context of what is violent. We have environmental violence. Believe it or not, some people might say, what happened in Marigot, there was not a lot of violence against people, but there was violence against the soil. The burning of the place, the digging of the soil. When you buy your KFC in town and you litter, you come up to Trafalgar, as some people do, and then they just stop doing that and go to Wharton by screws, and they leave their KFC in Wharton or Trafalgar. That's violence. That's violence against our land, because it is unsightly for us to see it. So we have this environmental violence, right? We have the psychological violence. There are people in relationships that cause harm to others by the things that they say. People say that sticks and stones can break my bones, but words can do me no harm. In fact, they should say that sticks and stones can break my bones and words can do me more harm. Because sometimes the things that people say have more impact. You're taking a shower, you're walking, years after, you're still hearing that that thing that that person said. There is financial violence. Whenever you let people be dependent on you to the point where their sense of purpose is mediated by the crumbs that you may give to them or dependent on you, whether it's in a relationship as a father and child, daughter, mother and child, or whatever, or whether it is a political relationship or police relationship, anytime you put people in economic dependence of you, that is a form of economic violence. It is a condition that is contrary to the quality of life of people. We have spiritual violence. People have used the Bible justify things against homosexuals, about what women cannot do, right? Ideas that make you feel subordinate as a person of color or as a person of a certain background, to feel less than, and to use the Bible and to use the verses as ways to make you feel less than. That is spiritual violence. And we have social violence in the context. Social refers to interactions and relations interactions and relations among humans. So anything that we may interact and relate to each other about that diminishes the quality of life of the actor or of the other person, that is violence. So when Simeon Joseph says that to talk about violence, you cannot start with violence, that's the point he's making, is that there are many types of violence, and in the process of getting physical violence, a lot of other violence acts precede physical violence. That's another way. Simeon, I see you're nodding, Simeon. That makes sense. So therefore, we have to say.
I know Simeon wants to come in, and so, but I want to see if Lambie wants to take a call, because I noticed that he's making some signals here.
Okay, sure.
If you have any calls, Lambie, you want to take one or two now? We're not hearing you. You have to turn on.
Yes.
Please go ahead, caller.
Yes, Lambie, it's me again. I had to call back because this conversation is very, very, very interesting, and I'm enjoying every bit of it. Thanks to Dr. Sergeant for the definition of violence when he mentioned the economic violence that I always speak about. But I want to go to Simeon, because Simeon dropped a bomb a while ago, and I would like him to expound on that so the people can understand where we are, because we are at the tipping point. He's made a statement in his dispensation a while ago that we can become so complacent that we will be more afraid of the violence more so than the violent person, the criminal. And I would like him to expound on that, because that is very, very serious statement, what he said. If I think the people fully understood what he said, they would really do something about it. So I would like him to go into that, just that line. We become more, it's a chance that we become more afraid of violence than being afraid of the criminal. And I would like to hear what he has to say further on that little line right there. Thank you very much.
Or take another call, Lambie? Or you want us to go ahead? Let's go ahead then. Dr. Sergeant, I don't know whether you want Simeon to make a quick intervention there on, on that contribution from the caller and on what some of the things that you said a moment ago.
One of my students, when I said, is the extra credit ready, but 5 hands went up, and I think one of them in the back wants to tell us what is a crime. So I think we would give them that opportunity.
Let's just turn on your mic. Let them
can tell us whichever. Tell them your name if you want, and then your.
Excellent.
Hi, I'm Chiara.
Hi.
A crime is an act that is a violation of the criminal statutes of the jurisdiction where the act occurs.
And can you also tell them where you're from? Because I just want them to know the diversity of my class.
Well, I'm from Belgium, actually, and I study for 4 months at Noordpark University.
Oh, that sounds excellent. Congratulations to you. Dr. Sergeant, is she on the credit?
Yeah, she's I have to take it. I know she's going to bug me for extra credit. So she said that a crime is an act that is a violation against the criminal statutes of the jurisdiction where the acts occurred. Right? Because, I was telling Mike and Dominica, we have burglary on the books. And if that happens in the United States, somebody in Dominica engages in what is called burglary in Dominica in the United States, where it is not legal, it doesn't matter, right? So so when we talk about crimes, we're talking about something very specific, because not every act against the law is a crime, because some acts are torts, some act may be like a speeding ticket and things like that. That's not a crime, depending on the level. So it's important that when we talk about crime, we're talking about some very specific categories of action. And while before I go to Simeon regarding the question, the way I understood the question from the statement from Simeon is that he said, like, if one fear of crime exceeds actual crimes, that could be a very big problem. One of the things I did in my 2011 proposal to the Prime Minister called, if you just looked on Google, you would do Peaceful Dominica proposal, you will see that proposal. And in that proposal, I warned of two things. I warned of the ticking time bomb, which is the ignoring the fact that there are a lot of crime problems that are going on the ground, that we're just turning a blind eye. And the other one is really about the exaggeration of crime. Like, if we are thinking that we have a bigger problem than we actually have, we will be overly reacting, and then we will tune some people will tune us out, because the way they feel in the crime is not the same way like the way the crime is acting. So I just wanted to add my understanding of what Simeon was saying and allow him, I think it is good time maybe have him elaborate on that.
No, I think that was perfectly explained. The fact is, what you do not want, you see, at any one point, that's why I said that the fear of crime is actually greater than the crime itself. You don't want to reach that situation. Because it means, therefore, you see, we have to be realistic when we look at crime and violence, okay? Sometimes it can be exaggerated. Sometimes it could be underestimated. We agree on that? Okay? And sometimes we could, and I give examples of it. I give examples where sometimes people feel that we don't really have a crime situation, when in fact there's a crime situation. But you do not want a situation where you overplay the situation of crime and violence, whereby people become so fearful of the actual situation, and that begins to affect many areas of our lives. That's what we have to be careful with, And so that is just something we have to reach the point of, because I am yet, and maybe Dr. Seja, you've been in Dominica quite a lot, Dr. George, but for those of us on the ground, we have to be sober enough and to admit the fact that in Dominica, we are yet to come up with a comprehensive national approach to dealing with the situation of crime and violence in Dominica on all levels. And so every now and again, what I don't like is when something egregious happens, we throw our hands up in the air, we talk about it for a day or two, and we put the situation back onto the back burner. Because we have to understand that for us to arrive at a new solution, we have to deal with the germane issues that continue to sprout up their heads every day. That's why I dealt with things like responsibility, etc. Because you see, we cannot be alarmed when Mr. Road, for instance, I'm going to be direct here. How often have we heard the Dominica Association of Industry and Commerce speak out on situations of crime and violence in Dominica? The last time they did was when Mr. Roll was murdered. And then sometime before that, when another merchant was affected. But does that make a businessman's life more important than the ordinary guys on the street who are shooting each other, stabbing each other, and attacking each other? No. If we are concerned about crime and violence, we have to become engaged with each other. And I'm not sure if the business sector in Dominica realize that the more dormant and silent they are about those everyday bread and butter issues, the more it is going to come to affect them and hit them right in their faces where they can't do much about it. Our business community seems to be afraid to engage, seems to be timid about articulating their concerns and their positions on things that are going wrong in society. And I'm not sure if they are losing their independence so much that they think that if they speak out, there will be the dependency syndrome, which they seem to enjoy themselves now, will be undermined. And we have to look at that very closely, because I mean, and I wish maybe we should have an economist there, because Dr. Seja and Dr. George, who are the more pristine intellectuals than me on this panel tonight, we have to understand that the economics of the country is at stake when crime and violence becomes predominant. And so the people who are involved in the economics, the machinery of macro and micro development, you cannot be on the back burner. You cannot be on the back burner, because crime and violence affects every strata of society. Okay, and when I read the newspapers, for instance, Mr. Gregoire, sometimes I read the newspapers and I see people being brought before the court for a tin of sardine, for a pound of sugar. And sometimes when you read the police reports and you see what people are arrested for, it speaks of the economics of people. Okay? On all levels, you know. That's why sometimes I'm heartened by some of the YouTube postings that I see, where poor people, sometimes are caught stealing, and some cashier or some business person, some supervisor says, okay, I'm going to pay for that for you. Because some people say I have to steal to feed my children and those kind of things there. So what I'm saying is there's an equation, there is a connection, there is an interrelatedness between economy and crime and violence, okay? And all those things hinge on the whole situation of the fear of crime, okay? Having a predominant space over crime itself.
Mr. Albert, what I want to say.
Joseph.
Oh my goodness. Oh jeez, forget I said that. Rewind seconds. Simeon, you didn't have to bust me on that, man. You could let that go, man. After all, man. Sorry then. Simeon, let's see. Simeon. In part of what I do, and I know the political scientists, you know, all of us have to train in economics and so on as well. In peaceology is the science and practice of making peace profitable. The difference between peaceology and criminology is while criminology studies why crime happens, there's a simple law of physics that energy follows attention. So the more we know of something is the more we contribute to it. Actually, believe it or not, much of what we learn about criminology teaches us more about crime and the profits that people may make for crime and our anger about crime. In peaceology, I say that crime pays, but peace pays more. And while we can think of crime as an economic deterrent in peaceology, in criminology, we think of peace as an economic asset in peaceology. So think about that. The proposal Peaceful Nature Isle that I proposed to the Prime Minister of Dominica in 2011 advocates moving from Nature Isle to Peaceful Nature Isle, creating a peace czar and creating an economy of peace in Dominica. Because we are losing money, we're losing people, and all these things for violence. I say that Peaceology Acres in Trafalgar is the first business in the world where we're going to import and export peace. We are saying that before you come to Dominica and visit Trafalgar there in Peaceology Acres, come with the most peace that you can have in your hearts, in your luggage, in your wallets. And we assure you that when you leave, you will leave with even more peace than which you came. What is peace? It's a state of existence that has a good balance of the absence of the things that are undesirable and the presence of the things that are desirable. So that is what the state of peace is. The feeling of having what is desired without the threat of what is not desired. So what I am advocating and what I said to the Prime Minister in that proposal and what I still say now, they said that 4.2 million US dollars over 3 years was too much to spend, and people say that it's money Dr. St. Jean wants. But there is not one line in that proposal that says how much money Dr. St. Jean was going to earn, because I already told all my advisors my labor was pro bono. the $60,000 for community events and so on and so forth. So what I would like to say is that we have to move away. We do not have to ignore this issue of crime and violence, but we have to stop chasing the tail of violence and what it's costing us and start thinking about the prosperity of peace. How do we make peace profitable? And profit is a simple notion. Profit is a return that is larger than your deposit. Some people want to deposit violence and get back peace. It doesn't work that way. You don't go to the bank and deposit money, ask for a baby, right? So the idea is that if we just think about how much violence is costing us economically, culturally, environmentally, socially, spiritually, and all that, can you think about the values of peace and not just monetize it, but make it profitable among different people? That is part of what I was doing with that the lives you saw me carrying over those months. That is what we're doing with the Christology Cultural Group with the Jinping music, giving people ways of depositing more of what they want in their life so it can grow with them over a period of time. So I just wanted to say that, and the economics is not about studying the problem, because when we study the problem, we know more about the problem, and we assume that we can just flip it around and put a father in the home and get a better home because the home is broken. But that's not always the case. In fact, sometimes some homes without fathers actually function than homes that have dysfunctional fathers in them or dysfunctional mothers. You understand? So I want to talk about the profits of peace more than talk about the cost of violence, realizing that the cost of violence is a good point of departure, because in Chicago, for example, we have more than $1 million equivalent for every time someone is shot with a bullet. Every time someone is shot, not even killed, it's $1 million. Because of the health care, because of the other overtime and the other things associated with a near fatal bullet. So let's think about the profits of peace, and let's think about not just how we go after the things that are happening, because every time we come to talk, we're talking about because we failed. How are we going to lead ourselves to understand how do we succeed? So I just wanted to add that, the economy of peace, rather than just thinking about the negativity of violence. And that's what we are building. I look forward to working. If every one of you, my students here, will hopefully come to Dominica on the study abroad, learn Jinping music, come to visit different areas, and understand how do Dominicans do peace, in spite of the fact that we have about 10 to 12 to 13 to 14 homicides, really about close to 18 to 19 per 100,000 per capita in Dominica. It is low by many standards, but it's too high for us. It's too high for us. That's not what we aspire to. But one of the things that people can learn about Dominica is how Dominica does peace. Because those things we hear happen so rarely, even if we have a lot of those violence acts. But there are so many things that could happen that do not happen. It's important to learn how Dominicans do peace. And I believe when we learn better and we put an economy around how Dominica does peace, we will be able to overcome some of those forces that result in violence by building a more positive society.
And I just want to also, as I'm going to go over to Lambi, because I know he has a few calls, I just want to also extend a very, very warm welcome to your students. If your students would come to Dominica, I'm sure that Dominica would extend the fullest extent of its hospitality to them. So Dr. Says your students would be very, very welcome if they did in fact visit Dominica. I wanted to go, since Lambi does not have a call right now, I'll just take the opportunity to go over to Dr. Dion George. Dr. George, we heard a lot about, well, not only the question of the cost of crime, but the profits to be made from peace. We also looked at the economics of crime and what causes crime or what may result in crime because of the economic situation or the lack of economic situation. When you take a town, for example, like Portsmouth, and let's just use that as an example. When you have, let us say, the Ross University that was there before, and they left and they went to Barbados, and they contributed about 30% of the GDP. Obviously, the town of Portsmouth takes a big economic hit. And it means that many of the properties that they have the mortgages to be paid on them, where students were living and professors were living and so on, it means that those people, their economy changed. The whole town, the whole situation changed. I mean, everybody who earned a dollar directly or indirectly was no longer earning that. Obviously, that has to create a situation. So the town becomes, closer to being a ghost town than it would have been if that economic value had been there. And certainly it was a very vibrant town in that way. I just wanted to use that as a point of takeoff to discuss the whole question of economy and crime. I mean, and then again, when we look at legislation, and we recall that recently a legislation was passed in the parliament that that legalized people 2.5 grams of marijuana, for example, for recreational purposes. The question is that the best that we could have done from an economic standpoint or a social standpoint? Because what does it do? It allows people to do that, but is it impacting the healthcare situation? Because if you have that in addition to an alcohol situation and in addition to all kinds of other, it means that the persons who are mixing some of those things obviously going to have some negative impact, but it will impact productivity. And that is where your economy. But if on the other hand, for example, the legislation had allowed for, let us say, cannabis to be processed and, in a way that it could be processed in a factory and the essential oils extracted and it will be used for medicinal purposes. So you can make a lot of medicines that extreme value in those medicines, so many varieties of this thing. It means that creates a whole level of economy. You create a lot of employment for a lot of young people who normally might be just thinking, hey, I'm just going to smoke a spliff or whatever they call it. Instead of that, they might be engaged in production and processing and exporting that could create and add value in the manufacturing process. Let's talk about a little bit about that, Dr. Dion George.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Gregoire. I mean, undoubtedly, if 30% of GDP were to exit a country, the country would, of course, suffer economically. And as Dominicans, we would hope that as a people, we can find ways to bring back some sort of investment that would benefit not just the people of Portsmouth, but the people of Dominica. And so that's critical. On the point of the economy and crime, of course, I think all of the panelists somehow touched on it, if not in detail, but some parochial way, that of course, it brings poverty, and poverty breeds crime. And so one of the things I know sociologists study is crimes like prostitution, murder, theft. These things are typical where economies are struggling. And of course, we mentioned the importance of the government playing a role. Like I said earlier, in the mayor race for Atlanta, the referendum here, the big issue here is crime. And so government cannot ignore that, and they ought not to ignore that, right? But of course, you mentioned something really, really important. I was talking about the marijuana issue and so forth. I would have thought that if the government were to have proposed a sort of economic policy with marijuana, perhaps exporting of the medical purposes and having discussions, working with experts, I would have been all on board. I am not against persons having their smoke. That's their choice, and that's their personal liberty. But I was thinking about something more economical, yeah, if that's understandable. Something that persons can be employed and that we can have an export, etc. Right? So that's something else. The other thing I would like to make reference to is something I heard Mr. Simeon Joseph mention. I really think it's important that the idea that a prominent person lose their life should not be the reason why we have the business forum or we have other organizations making it all of a sudden a big issue. That every life is one life too much, right? And I wanted to give credit to that statement. But also, it led me to think of something else, that nobody is above the law, right? I recall a case in the United States that's in 1803. It's called Mulberry versus Madison. And in a quick synopsis, just a quick brief of it, essentially that John Adams, who was a Federalist, he supported large government. He lost the election to Thomas Jefferson. But what they did is they appointed all of their guys to the administration. And so when the opposition came in, there are a lot of people with big position in the ministry. And so they did not give them their appointments, right? Anyway, the purpose of that discussion is the president did not give them the appointment. And so they took them to court. And the court had to deal with whether you could take the president to court. So the essence here is, can you take the president to court? And can you charge him? And well, the republic was at its as an infant, and they did not want to break up the country, and they did not give them the appointment. But what they did, they came up with something called judicial review, and essentially where the court could look at an action of the federal government, of the legislature, and deem it as being unconstitutional. I mentioned that to mention something called precedent. The fact that there are cases that one can use as a model to make judgments on current cases. And I think there is some sort of disparity, if you will, where crimes are happening and some persons are being remanded, Mr. Gregoire, up in Stock Farm, and some other persons are committing crime and they are getting bail. And that's an issue because it comes to the point is the law level where some are being remanded and some are getting bail. So maybe, was Lambi making some suggestion for a call?
Yes, I wanted to go to Lambi, but I wanted, before I went to Lambi just asked the caller to hold the call, because I wanted to take a question from one of Dr. St. Jean's students who had an urgent question he wanted to ask, and credits are involved, so let's get some credits going. Let's take the call. Turn on your mic and go right ahead. Let's take your student, Dr. St. Jean. Can you just turn on the mic and go right ahead?
Hello.
Hi, how you doing?
Hi. This question is kind of off topic, but I was gonna ask, what are some of the ways that you can export peaceology and import it?
Okay, excellent question. I'm going to, we'll leave Dr. St. Jean to deal with that, but I want, before I allow you to answer Dr. St. Jean, I want to go to over Lambi to see if Lambi want to take one or two calls from some of our listeners there. Lambi, go right ahead, give the numbers and take the call. Let's hear you.
Very interesting discussion, and Simeon, I'm proud of you. I guess you'll figure out my voice. One of the things that's lacking in Dominica is sporting facilities, and sport is very important to curb crime. And what we have seen in Dominica is the creation of ghettos, the creation of projects, and no sporting facilities for the youth of today. So I think if you want to talk about violence, and if you want to talk about curbing violence and peace, I think sport is one of the best ways we can do that. Before, when I was a kid, we played football, cricket, table tennis. I mean, we had so much to do. We had mangoes, we had guavas. But today, we've seen our football fields are turned into I don't even know. I mean, some of them don't exist anymore. When you build the projects in the different villages, Bellevue Chopin, a place like Granby, we had Bata Pros, different places, we're already building the projects today. No sporting facilities. We know what that can lead to. Frustration among the kids, they're already unemployed. Nothing else to do, leads to violence. Thanks much, guys, and continue the good discussion.
Yeah, and thanks a lot for your contribution. Lambert, you want to take another call? Okay, so if you want to hold on to the calls for a minute, and Dr. Sergio, let me go over to you. You might want to address the student's question.
Yes, I think the question that Hakam asked is, and I like that this question got his attention. But Hakam, by the way, why are you interested in that question anyway? Why you want to know? He just thought. He said, how can you import and export peace?
Peace,
right?
yeah.
So part of what we want to do is give a new attention to Dominica, right? Because in spite of the fact that we are all vexed about what recently happened, there are a lot of countries that are worse. That's not our measure. So how we import and export peace is the fact that we know that Dominica is a very peaceful country. Actually, Dominica is a mid-range crime level country in the Caribbean, right? Not the lowest, not the highest. And the idea is that a lot of Dominicans, like we just went for National Day, which is the pride in who we are as Dominicans, having been independent for 43 years from colonization, right, and from Britain. And the idea is that we have songs and we have dances and we have ways of being, the ways we grew up in our home, the way we grew up in our yards, a lot of things that we take for granted that people in other parts of the world that live in much more violent conditions than ours, that can be a setting for people to visit Dominica and learn how Dominicans do peace, how you bathe in the river, how you drink the coconut water, how you go to dance with people or you go to have events with people and not be scathed, right? How you could be in the woods, in the wilderness, in certain environments and feel the love, the genuine love and comfort of a people. How you can enjoy the greenery of the life, of the land. How you can go for the national trails. And if you're in a place like Chicago, where you feel hopeless in your situation, if you go to a place like Dominica, especially like some of the gang members and so on that I work with in the city, let's say a few of us here do peaceology of how to mediate conflicts peacefully and so on. We do this in Chicago, and we bring some gang leaders or people who have problematic behaviors overseas to Dominica in a context for a week or a few days, right? And give them another exposure to life. And then they come back in the environment and realize that everybody doesn't live in the kind of way that we see it. Because for us in Dominica, we think it's terrible because we have 10 murders. I mean, and it is terrible. But some people are like, what are you talking about? Well, so what I was saying is peaceology will not just focus on the bad things that are happening, but to say, why aren't things worse in Dominica? And the thing that why are things not worse, it is a product for other people to learn because some people have conditions that are much worse. Now, import and export means now how come that you are in Chicago, you're going to go to Dominica. So we're going to tell you to come on your best behavior. So before you go, you're not going to tear things up, right? You're going to go ready, you know, start to work out, start to exercise. So when you go walk the mountains, you're a little loose already, right? You're going to save your little money, you know, so you could tip the people a little good. You can, you know, buy the good food that you want to buy, some gifts to bring back to the people. You can have some tours and really enjoy yourself. Go out and see this nice clean water, brave, swim in the river and drink from the water while you're swimming. Go out and see the wonderful lakes and so on. And in spite of the fact that before you left your country, we told you to come with the most peacefulness you had in your hearts, in your wallets, right? And in your mind, when you come to Dominica, we're going to tell you that you're going to leave more peaceful than you came. You're going to come back having learned something about peaceology, the Jinping music, the National Day celebration, does the conversation with the people on the market, on the street, does the regular people that you see that will say good morning to you, little children will greet you, that you will find peacefulness within yourself. And when you go back to your context, you will go back more peaceful. So in other words, Dominica will be exporting peace through you because you'll be talking about the peaceful experience that you had in Dominica. That is the product that we're working on. That's what I mean by importing and exporting peace. Bring the most peace that you have, and then when you leave, you'll have even more peace. That's making it profitable, right? Because a profit is a return that is larger than deposit. Does that make sense? Now, can you tell us in a few seconds what it is I just told you? All right, so he's gonna go ahead.
So basically, he said, have like deposit like a little piece in yourself before you go there, and then you'll get like a profit when you come back.
There we go. You have more peace when you come back. He said it better than I did in less words. You see?
Well, I also have another question. Like, can you
Okay.
do it? Can you have peaceology in different countries as well, or?
Yes, actually, we're doing this in Chicago. One of the things we'll talk about here, and hopefully you can join me in some project, because on the south side of Chicago, actually, I purchased a building there, but the aldermen and the gangsters decided that they didn't want me there, so they stoned my building, broke my windows, and gave me a lot of hard time. Shame on them. So my country always embraced me. So the $60,000 or so US that I lost in this effort, I've spent, entered a multi-million-dollar project in Dominica, where the work is appreciated, and maybe God sent me there. So some of the work we do here, and we can have peaceology acres in different parts of the world. So hopefully what we're doing here in Chicago has fed in what's going on in Dominica, and hopefully what we're doing in Dominica can fit in other parts of the world. So peaceology acres doesn't have to be only in Dominica.
All right, so let me give Simeon Joseph an opportunity to add something more to some of what has been said. Simeon.
Yes, and you know, I really appreciate, but I want to again piggyback on this young man who spoke about sports, because for me, one of my silent interests is sports development. Equally speaking, one of my personal national regrets is the lack of sports development in Dominica. Okay, I think we have spoken a lot about sports development over the years and have practically done almost little for the enhancement of sports development in Dominica. Now let us situate this into context. In addition to what Dr. Teja would say, you know, violence is a threat to life. Okay? Now, just as violence is a threat to life, based on what Dr. Seja is saying, and the expression of the sportsman leads us to a realization of what I would consider the forces of life. Because the Pisology Initiative and engagement in sports, these are two positive things that can lead to what you call the forces of life. Now, in order for us to achieve a certain level of non-violent a country, a culture of peace, we must be able to embrace the positive sides of ourselves so that we can sort of give rebirth and regeneration to a more peaceful society and community. And we have to do that by examining what you call the forces to life. Now, what are our forces to life in Dominica? Can I just dwell on that a little? Right? What are the first, because that is how we will appreciate more what the sportsman said and what Dr. Seja is doing. For me, the prime force to life in Dominica is something called the celebration spirit. When you look at our people, I'm not sure if you have ever experienced Dominica during independence season, for instance, or during carnival season, to see how people celebrate life and bring to the fore the best of our talents, the best of our energies, the best of our positive spirits, the best of our people coming together, especially during independence time, and putting on the front burner the best of ourselves in music, in culture, in drama, in food. And you could say it's even a moment of reconciliation where Dominicans forget who is from the country, who is from town, who's labor, who's workers, who's anything. So we have that kind of celebration spirit. So that's what I see as our premier force to life, celebration of life in Dominica. The second thing I want to look at is, and I'm just going to name a few of them because you see, we cannot speak about the decrease in violence. And I want to focus on that, on this thing about life. Life is important. Life is something that has to be valued and appreciated. The second thing is our people, a mixture of our people. The Kalinago, the mixture of people from dark race to you could say other races. And how Dominicans have been able to Dominica is one of the few countries in the Caribbean where we do not have what you call race differences. Look at what happens in Guyana, in Trinidad, in Jamaica. The differences, even in Guadeloupe, just there, the differences between our races. We don't have that in Dominica. In Dominica, we have a confluence of our mixture of our races and our culture. That is the second, what do you call it, force of life in Dominica. The third one is we have a strong sense of freedom and space to define life. Hey, Dominica is a very free country when you really look at it, right? We have liberty to almost enjoy our rivers, our beaches, our seas, our mountains, our parks, anywhere in Dominica that you want. And we can still claim that. Whenever my Jamaican friends come to Dominica to see me, they're amazed that we don't have burglar-proof bars on her compared to how in Jamaica, every house has to have a burglar-proof bar and a burglar-proof gate. And so we look at that, the freedom, people can almost go from place to place almost relatively freely. Then another thing that we need to be appreciative of in Dominica is something called the extended family and community life. Okay, and that is a strong aspect of our Dominican society, where people look out for each other, where parents, grandparents, aunties, uncles adopt extended people of the other members of the family. We also have our geography, right? Which to me is the epitome of creation. I think there is a saying that goes, Dominica is the second Garden of Eden, and there's no doubt about it. When you traverse the world and you traverse the Caribbean, and you come to Dominica, that's why we can say Ipanema place Kiplimeye. And so we can see that Dominica is imbibed with that creativity and then our sense of rhythm and learning process. When you put those things together, you will appreciate when a sportsman will make the cry for greater recognition in sports. And I think for too long, our sports people in Dominica have been taken for granted. We have a lot of positive footballers and cricketers, but we have to ask ourselves, in earnest, where are the playing fields? All right? What is the level of investment in our sports in Dominica? Does our business community support our football teams, our basketball teams, our cricket teams, our netball teams? Okay. What is the strength of governmental support in sports development? And so this is one force to life, because when sportsmen come together, it creates a certain synergy and a certain energy so that people can interact with each other and develop that sense of camaraderie, that sense of community spirit, that sense of teamwork. And I think it is very important that we do not take that for granted, and then think that that should be placed on the second burner, because in most of our rural communities, I'm not sure if you guys remember, Dr. Dion George referred to that earlier, when they would go on the playing field in Salisbury, and the whole community would turn out to support each other. And we cannot take that for granted. When those things happen, we are being generative, so to speak, for more life. And the more life we can generate, the more we are able to dispel those levels of insecurity and instability that creates the kind of violence that we see happening among us.
And yes, clearly, I mean, you've totally made the case there, I mean, for physiology. And I'm sure that our student is a lot more clear on what that comports now that you've added to what Dr. Sanchez had already explained so very well. But I wanted to take before I go over to Dr. Dion George, I wanted to take another question from one of your students, Dr. Sanchez. So please let it go right ahead. You can just say your name and just go ahead and talk. Is the mic on or off?
I called my student the wrong name and I'm being reprimanded. This is the second time I call her Jennifer, and her name is Brenda. I'm apologizing to the world, Brenda. You forgive me? She didn't forgive me. Sorry.
All right. So hi, Brenda. How are you doing? You can go right ahead with your question.
I'm good, thank you. My question is that how can you bring peace if not everyone wants peace? And by that, I mean, from like Joseph, you said that community helps people, but not everyone has a good community. Not everyone has this loving and caring home. There's so many people and so many children out there that have broken homes, and you can show them all the peace around the world and all the love and care. But if they keep going back to this broken home where there's fights, the drugs, abuse, then how can you change their behavior? It has to be more than just showing them other countries' peace, you know?
Well, I have to say that, Dr. Sanchez, that's an exceptionally good question. Let me just add, I know that Simeon will want to add to that, and you too, but I just want to take a little piece of it. Here's what I knew growing up in Dominica. It really took an entire community to raise a child. And it was really not left to just that family unit, because the entire community, the village, was responsible. And if that child somewhere ran into some difficulty, they would help that child. They would come back to the family and report on that. The family would then take action. That kind of community spirit, we sort of put it in a one word in Dominica, which Brenda may not understand, which is a kudme, because it's a matter of everybody helping each other to make progress, to get some things done. And the way the family unit was structured, it was more like the community was an extension of the family. So really no child was left totally on their own. Let me just give you an example of how people operated. If I, for example, lived in the town and I went to one of the villages to visit people, they would not allow me to live there without filling the back of my vehicle with provisions and fruits and vegetables and whatever they had. The point is, they may be poor, the family may not be as organized as it should be, but they always found something in their heart, somewhere to give. Another example is this. Most people, when they cook, they would say, look, I'm going to cook a little extra because who knows who might stop by, who might be hungry, who might not have had a meal, who might need something. it shows you the thing of the heart and how people felt about each other. Today, it may not be as strong as it used to be, but that is part of the heritage. I hope that that kind of adds a little bit more to what Brenda was thinking, because this is what happens in a small. Again, let's face it, we have a smaller community. There's 70,000 people in Dominica. The island is about 20 miles long by about 10 miles wide on an average. So obviously, I mean, people know each other's the numbers of their vehicle. They know where they live. You know, they know where they work. They know what your expertise, your profession is. It's sort of a close-knit society because 70,000 people is very easy. That's not even enough to fill a big stadium, right, Brandon? So in fact, the relationship's different. And when we talk about a village or a country, it is very important that we understand the context in which that is being said. So when you look at the family unit and children coming from a disoriented home, yes, that exists. Yes, there are sometimes institutions, and maybe in some cases, the institutions are not strong enough to deal with those situations in those exceptional cases. But in fact, this is, in terms of what Dr. Saint-Jean is talking about, peaceology, he wants to bring back this old traditional way of life where there's so much love and community involvement and community engagement, community responsibility for the people of the community. I think this is what it's saying. Let us take that and let's package that. Let's take the best of what we can extract from that. It's not a perfect world. There's no place that is perfect. I mean, we have the greatest water in the world. We have the greatest nature in the world. We have the greatest air quality in the world. We have a lot of natural foods and natural herbs and spices and medicines, but still it's not a perfect world. But all of that, I believe, you can add value to that and you can package that and sell that and export that to the world. So people who come to Dominica can participate and enjoy that. They can go to the hot springs, the natural hot springs. I mean, there are not too many places where you can go to in Chicago, you'll find natural hot springs. And so these are very nutritious. They have a lot of medicinal value and very health value, a lot of health value, and they add to your well-being. But most of all, it adds to your peace of mind. Just the fact that you're moving around in a small society where everybody's saying hello to each other, everybody knows each other by the first name. You don't feel that you're just isolated and you're just a number in a big city. Part of that does it. But who am I to say that? Let me go over to Simeon to add a little bit more value to that.
No, I think we were going to Dion.
Oh, yes. Well, yes, Dion, sorry. Dion.
Yes.
Well, I've been very healthy, and I will pause to say that I like the tone of this conversation, and I really appreciate the students participating. I will say that. I think we have identified what the problem is, and we have looked at it from several angles. And I think Mr. Simeon Joseph made a recognition as to what we do not want, right? And what we do not want is a situation of a disparity in terms of economics, where the wealth gap becomes wider as the rich gets richer and the poor gets poorer. So that's what we don't want. And I say we do not want that because there is a theory, and most of us here who studied sociology, he was a sociologist, but he has contributed so much to economics. I'm talking about Karl Marx, right? And he spoke of dialectic materialism and the whole idea that when the poor gets poor enough, that they would come to what he called a class consciousness, and that they would overthrow the bourgeoisies. And they would not do so via elections, You know how they would do it? They would do so via what he called a revolution. Now, the latter part of his theory has been criticized by Western scholars, right? The latter part of the theory is that they would have a classless society and it would be a utopia, etc. And so whilst that has been criticized greatly, the structural dynamism of which he understands wealth and society cannot be taken away. And so what he did very geniusly, I will submit, is to mix sociology with economics. And I really thought I would have touched on that. The other idea that the student asked about how can we export and import peace, and what if someone does not want peace, I thought that was so intuitive. I think so because there is another theory called realism. And this theory says that there will be no peace. In fact, proponents of realism like Plato would argue that the only people that will see peace are those that are already in their grave. And so the idea is, if you are alive today, there will be war. In fact, I think earlier Dr. Seja mentioned that. Well, perhaps not to that point, but there is a realist, his name is Chad Clausewitz, he's German, and he says that war is the only way to peace. Yeah, he said war is the way to peace. And I mean, this might be an antithesis of what we have been talking about. But I guess the underlying theme of what I want to concentrate on is what I think each of us has touched on, the idea of how we grew up and the fact that the Caribbean, even though it may not be institutionalized, but that our family structure, the kudme, the cricket on Sundays, the church, this respect for life, just love, respect for elderly people, we have to find ways to bring it back. And I just thought I would have shared that little portion on it. Thanks.
Yes, of course, and thanks a lot. Dr. Sergeant, I don't know whether you wanted to add something more to this.
No, what, Simeon, I'm going to say something first. I think he was in queue, no?
Well, yeah, but the thing is, you see, and the thing is, thank you very much, Dr. Dodge, for that observation, and also Dr. Seja. One of the things we have to realize is, one of the things we have not done is recognize that we are in a very pluralistic world, okay? And sometimes we are caught between two things: social decay and spiritual revolution, if you get my drift. Okay, so in the midst of this very pluralistic society and world that we are constantly faced with, we recognize that at the heart of it, you will also come up with social revolution, okay, and spiritual decay. As our society transcends and changes, the spirit of people in whatever form is going to change, okay? And society, for want of a better word, will also transform. Now, we have not coped too well in this pluralistic world, because it seems as though that as we face the challenges of society and they transform, we perhaps will need to go back and try to anchor our roots deeper into who we really are in terms of our identity. Now, there are threats to that. How do you sustain that, for instance, when within and among our societies, there is political divide? There is a preponderance of religious faiths and beliefs that unfortunately attack each other. You'd be surprised to know that churches, to gain members, rather than speaking of the goodness of the churches and the glory of Christ, will criticize each other. Very much like a young man who wants to date a girl, rather than using his prowess and his masculine agility to woo the girl, he would back up the girl's boyfriend so that he can gain that girl. So you see, we have that tug and pull of things. And also it's sad, it's very sad that we see emerging more and more that political, institutional, political tribalism that sets people apart, that divides people, that proposes a language of us and them, and being one of us and not being one of us, and almost wants to dictate that people should not get jobs, people should not eat, people should not get be afforded financial assistance from the banks if they do not support certain political parties. All this has to be held into perspective as we try to keep that cement that holds our societies together, because that's a challenge. We may want as much as possible to hold our societies together in strong cohesion, but if we have those two forces, religion and politics, pulling people apart, then we face the chances of how you call it, our efforts being undermined, and that doesn't mean the challenge is insurmountable. I just think we have to be cognizant of the fact that the efforts at sustaining life, at engendering peace, at promoting nonviolence, at creating a culture of harmony, needs to be taken up, mindful of the possible seeds of negativity that threaten those efforts.
So thanks, Mr. G. I will make a contribution to answer Brenda's question, because I train my students to listen and respond to what you were asked. And if they do not answer what I asked them on the quiz, they get a deduction, because they are trained to be very disciplined listeners and very attentive to what they ask, and to be as brief as possible, even if sometimes I get long-winded. So Brenda, to explain this to you, I sometimes bring, Dirk and Bo, guys from the south side of Chicago involved in the BDs, GDs, they may be involved in different street organizations that people call gangs. And I bring them to North Park. And they go up to the cafeteria and they walk around the campus in the same city, from the south side of Chicago. And these guys feel sometimes like they just took a field trip. I take them over out west and they drive and they see the lawns, the people's lawns. And I said I did not have this situation down the south side. But all of a sudden, in spite of the poverty, in spite of the fact that they've been to prison for murders, in fact, the fact that they have been stabbed, they've been shot, they see situations in certain ways. And every now and then, I bring them to sit in areas and they see poor white people. And they thought that they didn't have poor white people that live seemingly worse than they did. And these guys go back to the south side of Chicago. Not that they say, what am I complaining about? But they realize that there is some level of hope. Because peace begins with us. And peace begins with making an investment in ourselves, that we are not going to harm ourselves and we're not going to harm others. Because the fight you start is not always yours to win. And sometimes it simply means taking yourself out of the context. So just taking these guys over to Trenton College, just taking them over to Maywood, and just coming up on campus and talking with students. And Brenda, the most impactful thing is when I bring active gang members, sometimes they have ankle bracelets still because they just came out of prison, to speak with you. And they assume that you're middle class. They assume that you're wealthy. And they learn that somebody's father may have been killed by homicide. They learn that you may have grown up in a condition of poverty, what may be a different poverty than they know. And they know that you are struggling, working 2 jobs, 3 jobs. They realize, oh my goodness, what I thought about the world is not the same. I brought 2 police officers from Buffalo, New York to Dominica to train the police in community policing. And these men still talk about that experience today, because they went in homes of people that they consider to be poor, because the people didn't have running water or the person didn't have electricity. But the vibrance of the love and how clean the people's yards were, they're like, who am I to make a noise? Like, yeah, people who are in poverty, but they have heat and they have electricity. And there are people that they see that are poor, that seem to be poor in materially, but not poor in spirit. And then in that poor country, they get to see big homes, expensive homes, and a lot of middle-class people. And they get to see that even sometimes the beggar on the street still says good morning to them. And children say, you understand? So now they start to invest in themselves, making peace profitable. So now you might say, okay, I am poor, I do not have a job, I'm on welfare. The police shot my cousin, and I have all this oppression in Chicago. What is going to a next country do? What is going to do for me? It made them realize that the agency, that's part of what they can do with their own conditions. And not that they should stop complaining, but life for them is a little better than they thought, right? And that other people that are in situations that may be even worse on some levels actually living better in some levels. So what excuse they have to not do better themselves? Does that make sense? So that is what it is, helping people to realize that peace begins with me and giving them a different way to experience peace. That's what I think. That's all. So people who don't, and what is peace? Sometimes people do not want peace. Like you and I may have a conflict, we are siblings, because you always borrow my car, you borrow my money. So if we have a problem, And you're not talking to me, that's a good thing. You're not borrow my car, you're gonna borrow my money. I'm sure we all have family members like that. So sometimes you may say, well, I don't want peace. Yeah, I want peace. I just don't want you to borrow my car so much. I don't want chaos. I don't want to be mad with you. I just don't want you to abuse me. So at the end of the day, most people want better conditions for themselves. So everyone say, well, I don't want peace that the BDs and the GDs are fighting. They say, no, we don't want peace because we want to say we are gangsters and we want to carry that. Well, suppose you can go out and get the girls and get the money and do whatever you're doing, but not have each other dead. Would you like that too? Most likely they'll say yes. So that's what we're hoping, that people will re-examine themselves and reinvest in the peace within themselves, in spite of what's going on around them. Okay? All right, guys, thank you so for the opportunity.
Dr. Senja, I wanted to ask you to add something here because I still wanted to talking points that you had. Was the need for a conspicuous national level strategic approach to addressing crime and violence issues in Dominica? And there is a need to address and overcome the failed attempts at community policing in Dominica. This must be accompanied by aims to find a more culturally appropriate approach to achieve improved police services, improve individual, family, and community self-regulation, and improve government involvements in capacities for reduced crime and violence and improve peace. Let's talk about that a little bit more.
We oftentimes blame the government for doing too much for people. At the same time, we blame the government for not doing enough. Everything that goes wrong, Skerrit did it. Skerrit, I'm not saying that Skerrit is without sin, and whoever the next prime minister will be, that prime minister will do it. What is the responsibility of the people? And actually, the government gets there because of the people. So if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. You cannot have a system. Part of why, even as bad as things are in Chicago, part of why things are not worse in Chicago, and part of why things are not worse in Norway and in Sweden and in the Netherlands, in Leiden and some places, is because their actual plans designed, they don't say to make peace profitable, but to improve quality of life and have people benefit. You cannot just go to bed at night and wake up in the morning, go to bed at night, wake up in the morning, and expect your life to improve. You need to have a plan to improve your life. And when the plan is not working, you have to be able to tweak it and come back and adjust. And we do not have, because you have a police department, you have mission on national security, you have nurses and doctors, that's not the plan. Mr. G, if you Google Peaceful Dominica proposal, you will see that plan for national development through more peacefulness that I am talking about. It's there, it's still there, and it's still relevant. And the thing is that we have to remove the power, the power of the people are greater than the power of people in power. We have to remember that. So the primary responsibility for a safe community, for children to be less involved in crime and violence, to start the wrong way, begins more with the people outside of so-called government than the people in government. And people have to take back their nation, take back their village, meaning that we have to primarily take responsibility for how we want to live, and elect people that are going to support that way of living. And when they don't, change them. And if they want to corrupt us, maybe we'll do things like handbag, and maybe Granby will rebel if they have the courage. And if there's word that there's going to be buying the votes, maybe people will not sell their votes, and maybe people will support handbag to send a message that no, we are the ones in control here. We want to be represented by who we represent and why. Maybe people want Vince. Well, I don't know if it's Dr. Henderson, because in the US, I think he has a JD, and we do not call JDs doctor. So Vince Henderson, the same way that I do not call the prime minister doctor because he hasn't earned a PhD. When you earned a doctoral degree, PhD, JD, so then we call you. So it's just like giving a fake badge, right? So it's not. So Vince Henderson, if he's running, and is rightfully so, he's a man of Granby background, he's entitled to that. But maybe what someone like Handbag is saying is that we want organic ways of responsibility. So, Mr. G, what I'm saying in this is that the people need to own this plan. In Trafalgar, in Watton Waven, in Portsmouth, in Granby, wherever it is, people need to figure out how our grandparents raised us and great-grandparents raised us, to continue to build that and to make that be the thing we want government to support. Not to wait for government to tell us how we're going to have our neighborhood safe. That is what I mean in that process. And that is part of what Peaceology is trying to help us do, to build our society from the bottom up. even if from the top down there'll be recognition, but primarily from the bottom up.
Yes, and very well said too. And I wanted to ask both Dion and Simeon to maybe add a little bit more to comment on this link, because all night we've been talking about some of these linkages and the strong links between politics, policing, governance, crime and violence in Dominica, obviously, and economics and all of that. So I mean, obviously, there are some links, there's some very organic links, and there are some links that really are not so good, that we need to look at to see how can we mitigate against some of those things, how can we avoid some of the pitfalls from those relationships there, you know, among all those various activities that I just spoke about. And if we want to relate that back to Granby, we can, because I mean, what we have there is an event taking place where a man of humble beginnings is running against a giant with maybe an organization that is well oiled with a lot of money behind it, and he may not have any money at all, but he's left to the grassroots people. Well, we know Granby. At one time, people used to say that Granby was a violent place, but really, Granby was really just a place where people were independent, free-spirited people, and they felt that they wanted to control their own destiny. But what I'm hearing now is that they seem to be getting the impression that somebody from who's not organically there is being imposed on them and forced upon them. And I think that is where you have seen people like Handbag coming up in the elk of some of the people who went before him, who were more independent minded. You say, no, we have to take a stand, and we want to the person that we want from Granby. We want the person that Granby recommends, not a person that somebody else decides is good for us and wants to impose on us. So I just wanted to explore those linkages there, you know, between because we see it happening so much in small island developing states, you know, the links between the politics and what happens in the politics and the money in politics and the policing and the relationship between the politicians and the policing and crime, and how crime, we see our courts are getting so backed up with crime sometimes because the system is so slow. The wheels of justice are turning very slowly. Some cases that are supposed to be heard are taking 7 years to get heard, and the important cases. And the question of and the relationship with the violence. And let me just ask that maybe Dr. Dion, George, you can maybe make a first comment on some of that, and then I can go to Simeon and ask him to add some more on that.
Okay. Well, one of the ways that one approaches such a concern, of course, one recalls the initial statement of politics as being a factor that is associated with crime. And the example that I used was an example within the context of the Caribbean, which is Jamaica, right? During Michael Manley and Edward Siega. But I mean, it is visible, especially in the African continent, what politics has done, particularly in Black populated countries, how they have divided us and let us hate each other. And of course, we witnessed in Salisbury the night before the election, violence, shootings and tear gas. And one hopes that these things does not repeat itself. And so when we speak tonight, we speak as people who care for our country and we care for our people. And yes, there is a direct linkage between peace and governance. And so there is a Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. His name was John Marshall. And he says, peace is not the absence of war, but peace is knowing how to combat it. And so we don't ignore it and we don't pretend like it doesn't exist. I'm talking about violence and crime. But what we have to do is look at how other countries dealt with it and how other societies have dealt with it. And can we learn something from it? And how do we apply it? And so, for example, New York City, you talk about Granby, but New York City, once upon a time, used to be very violent. People say you don't walk the streets in New York in the night. But then there was this, I don't know, Mayor Giuliani or one of those guys who came across, and they put certain laws that were so stringent that literally they cleaned up the city. As I mentioned earlier, even in Atlanta, right now, the referendum here, the big issue here is crime. And so clearly, these people realize that there is something that the leaders has to do, which could include meeting with the people, having town hall meetings. and saying, okay, this is this, and we need some community policing, etc. And leading by example too. That is, if one of your own commits an atrocity, they should go with the equal justice system and let it be institutionalized and not patronized, right? And so I think I will just share that thought. And of course, Simeon, you may want to add some more to that.
Yes, Simeon.
Just amazing that we have to give Giuliani credit, but it's just ironical that he became a criminal himself on behalf of Trump, you know?
Simeon, as you mentioned that,
Sad anticlimax.
and we also remember the Jamaican situation, right?
Yes.
I mean, remember Jamaica used to be rough around election times, and there was this.
Well, I will tell you one thing. In the May '93 election in Jamaica, I was in the middle of it. I was on a bus in downtown Kingston when bullets passed through that bus, the window of that bus. I was going back up to UWI, and I happened to have gone downtown to do some reporting for Voice of the Islands Radio for Ken Richards, who was the news editor at the time, and he was using me as the correspondent in Jamaica. So I experienced it firsthand when I was in Jamaica and the level of crime in Jamaica that there was. I saw that. Similarly to Dr. George and Dr. Seja, I'm not sure if you all are aware of the gang situation in Dorchester, in Boston, at some time ago in the 1990s. And I was also very much part of the Peace to the City campaign, where the gang warfare in downtown Boston, Dorchester, was a major problem. So I was part of the Peace to the City campaign that studied that area of gang violence. That leads me, however, to the whole system of governance. And one of the areas of governance that we need to examine very closely is our criminal justice system. We cannot discuss peace or crime and violence without having a critical look at our criminal justice system. And we have to ask the question of the need to tackle some of the fundamental problems at the heart of our own criminal justice system. Because it's not just about money. It's not just about putting more money. You can have as many policemen as possible. You can have the best trained policemen. You can improve your prisons. You can reform the police force. You can reform your court system, okay? It is about culture, one, our belief, our approach. And at every step of the way, our criminal justice system has become overwhelmed by political correctness and paperwork, particularly political correctness. And so we see political correctness as undermining our police, okay? And the police can only do their job properly if they are able to intervene. And so we have to think of the question of the independence of our police system and our judicial system to confront and to take action against crime and antisocial behavior. It is alleged that sometimes, depending on who commits the crime, some people, and I think it's Dr. Seja or Dion who alluded to that, some people will languish in the courts awaiting bail, while others, before they are arrested, they are released on the street. So the police cannot police our streets if they have one hand tied behind their back, or if the paperwork that they have to do keeps them chained to the desk. So they may have that deluge of bureaucracy, so to speak, and not able to employ the things that they have to have. Now, we also have to look at what we may term the mismanagement of our prosecution systems and our court, right? And to what extent cases are abandoned out of errors, okay? How many defendants are free because of delays in gathering evidence or trials? When you look at the number of mysterious deaths in Dominica and murders, there are murders that have been committed since 2008, 2009, 2012, and the cases are yet to be called. And you see the people who have been arrested on the streets, maybe more free than you and I. Not that doesn't mean to say that they are guilty, but where is there going to be justice, at least for the dead, or at least even for those who are waiting trial to know whether. So we have to examine all of those things, and we have to come to invest a little more in our ability to have a criminal justice system that has integrity, that is free of political interference, that doesn't have the one hand tied behind the back, and that the police are independent enough, and the criminal justice system is independent enough and devoid of any political interference to ensure that, because you see, in any society, and Dr. Sesha is better able to speak at that than I am, but in any society where people get the feeling that they can get away with impunity for the wrongs that they do, is one that is headed in a direction that is undesirable. Because that is where a lot of other things begin to break down. And when you also have a society where some people feel that they can break the law in utmost abandon and nothing happened to them, we are also on the other extreme point of breakdown. So that is tied to governance, because at the heart of crime and violence is governance of the justice system.
And we only have 7 more minutes because, as you know, when you're having fun, the time just goes by very quickly. So it's just about that time when we're going to take some closing remarks. I believe we've covered some ground tonight. We never really get to cover everything, do we? But certainly, I think we covered some good ground. And I really want to appreciate the presence of Dr. Sanjay, your students here tonight. I don't know if you would like any of them to say something very quickly before we wrap up. If there's anybody who wants to say something very quickly before we give them the opportunity. Or otherwise, if not, then I will go to Dr. Dion George. Let's do.
All hands said no. They said they are satisfied with silence.
Excellent. Appreciate their presence here. Dr. George, let's just take some final remarks for you as we close.
Well, Mr. Gregoire, as always, thank you so much for the invitation, and thanks to my panelists. I really appreciated those discussions, those points. Thanks to the callers, Lambi, as always. Thank you so much, my friend. Thanks to Showin, and thanks to the students, and thanks to the listeners. I think tonight we covered, crime and governance. We looked at some of the causes of crime. We looked at some comparative data in the Caribbean and Latin America, and specifically, we looked at Dominican trend analysis as to how the crime rate is going up. And so we discussed that at length. I want to leave with a scripture tonight, and that scripture reading is taken from the book of John in the New Testament, chapter 15, and it says, "As the Father has loved me, so I love you. Now remain in love. And if you keep my commandments, you will remain in love, just as I have kept my Father's commandment and remain in his love. I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. My commandment is this: love each other as I have loved you." And I think that wraps up the whole idea of culture and the institution of the family, the whole idea of kudme, the whole idea of respect for life. It's a way of life that we had. And according to Dr. Sager, this whole idea of peace and this whole idea of respecting people's lives, and even, we did not talk on it, Mr. Simeon Joseph, but the whole idea of respecting life at all levels, even with the unborn. I guess that's a discussion for another time. So anyway, with that, I would say good night and thank you.
And thanks a lot, Dr. George. I want to go over to Simeon, but I just asked Simeon, you wrap up. We did, in fact, also look at the question of violence, and there was a definition of violence, and I believe Dr. Senja indicated, maybe it might have been him, that violence is not just physical. There could be economic violence and financial violence when you cause people to be dependent on you rather than building an economy and allowing them to grow personally and to self-actualize and to become self-sufficient. That is a form of violence. So Simeon, as we close, as you wrap, maybe you might want to take a little shot at that.
And we can say psychological violence, where people are faced under that oppressive spirit of not being free, okay, of being fearful of speaking out, of being fearful of being who they are, of being fearful to support who they want. psychological violence can be very intimidating, where people feel that if they identify sorry, with certain people, excuse me, or be associated, or that they must all conform to one ideology or one preference. And so psychological violence can be something that debilitates and imprisons and oppresses more than we think. And then we have to look at institutional violence, where machinery of the state or the institutions that exist are used against the people, whereby people do not achieve and realize their full potential. Because sometimes the institutions that exist can be used as oppressive forces against people to deny them the realization of their full potential. On this note, I want to thank you very much. I hope it's not the last. And I hope it's not going to be a reactive program. I think we really have to tackle this thing of violence. So thank you very much, Mr. G, for ushering in this program. Dr. Serja, nice working with you again. And Dr. Dion, nice meeting you and being engaged with you for this evening. And like Dr. John, I had a closing biblical quote. So you see we connect, huh? And my biblical quote was from John 10:10. And it says where Jesus said to his disciples, I have come that you may have life and have it more abundantly. Because I think that should be the essence of our existence, that we are created beings, molded and fashioned to achieve our fullest potential with the God-given talents that have been bestowed on us, that we have endowed with. And anything that can prevent a human being from realizing their full potential and having abundant life, to me, is violence on the essence of creation.
And thank you for that, Simeon. And Dr. Serja, as I come to you to just close up, to give you the final word. Essentially, I think what I gleaned from you tonight is that you look at violence, you look at crime, you look at governance and all of that, but you also think it is very essential to look at the other side of it, is the peace, the profitability of peace, and having a peaceful society, a good economy that is based on peace. And so let's talk about it a little bit as you just wind down, and just so we can say goodnight to the folks. And I just, again, before I leave, just want to say really terrific having your students here with us tonight.
Thank you, Mr. G, and hopefully my students can have an opportunity to join you again, maybe another class, but hopefully that will be the case. Because you see what happens when they show up, they force us to, they change the atmosphere of the conversation, right? Because the questions they ask, encourage or force us to speak about things. We began by talking about the problem of crime and violence. A crime is an act that is a violation against the criminal statutes of the jurisdiction where the crime occurs. So something that is a crime somewhere is not necessarily be a crime somewhere else. We said that there are many different forms of violence, and because there are different types of crime and different types of violence, there is no one cause of crime. So there is no one solution to crime. There's no one cause for violence. There's no one solution to violence. We started by asking why are there so many murders in Dominica for now, why we have, 3 in 2 days. And if we have to look at it, expand the days more, and they're heinous, not just the quantity, but the quality. The person that died, but how the person died, that caused us to be so alarmed. And I wish to see a society more where we can have this type of conversation that is not so much that's drawing against the thing that is undesirable. Not that we need to ignore it, but how we create a paradigm where we can spend that time building on more of what we want to see. Sometimes the bad things happen to allow good things to shine. So I would just say in brief in closing, that why is there so much crime and violence in Dominica, with Dominica being a low crime and low violent place, or mid-range, depending how you look at it. I say if we want to build a more peaceful Dominica, in addition to, or even more important than the question that why we have so much crime and violence, if we really want a sustainable curative solution, the key question is the peaceology question, which is why isn't crime and violence even worse in Dominica? And if we think about that, why isn't crime and violence even worse in Dominica? We will see that those vexing violence and crime incidents that happen are actually outliers and actually infiltration on our normal way of living. Because normally we live without that level of problems. So why aren't things worse? And when we find the answer, how can we put that in a bottle and sell it? And instead of chasing the tail for violence to happen and then try to arrest it and bring it down, let us continue to build the momentum of the peacefulness that we have to make peace profitable. And in the process of doing that, we will also reduce those vexing problems. And I ask everybody to join us, to follow our Peaceology community, to when you go up Trafalgar, you know, even if for now we just wave at Peaceology Acres, but people that work on the area, and as we do events, when I'm in the ground in Dominica during the Christmas season, I will talk about some of the events of Peaceology, and we ask you to join us to help make peace profitable. This is Dominica's gift to the world. Peaceology is ours. Peaceology began here, and the world is following what we have started. Let's continue to build on that while we address those vexing problems. Thanks for this opportunity.
Yeah, and I want to thank all of you. I mean, Dr. George, Dr. Simeon, and you, Dr. Saint-Jean, all of your students for joining us here tonight. And they asked some very, very, very sound questions here tonight. Appreciate them. And I want to thank all the folks who joined us on Facebook. We had some technical difficulties on Facebook, but it looked like it's resolved itself. It's back up now. So we want to thank all the folks who were there and for the generous comments. Some people commented that really it's all about handbag and grande now, but we still have to discuss all the other topics. But I know that is what most people want to hear is about handbag and grande because they're so enamored with this young man, you know. So, but nonetheless, I want to thank everybody, all our listeners. I want to thank you, Lambi and Sherwin, for keeping us on the air tonight and taking our listeners' calls. And certainly, gentlemen, thank you so much. It's not going to be the last discussion. As Simeon says, we cannot be reactionary about this. We need to be proactive and have open, genuine discussions about everything concerning crime and violence and governance and so on. And then to look at, I think we should also look more closely at the notions of peaceology as Dr. Saint-Jean is putting it. So everybody just want to say thank you and good night to everybody until the next time. Bye.
Mr. Gregoire, can we ask Mr. Saint-Jean to how you call it, develop a tourism product for this peaceology thing? Dominica, the whole of Dominica can be a peace, a garden of peace. So you need to, so we can have some economic boom of many students and most persons coming to Dominica. That's a good tourism product. Eh?
Well, I think
we're working on that, and we'll do some more. You'll help me out when I see you in Christmas. Come let's plan it, okay? Over the holiday.
I'll tell you what. I'll tell you what. I think it's a very good idea because I think there's so much we can do from an economic standpoint. I mean, in terms of all the natural things we have. Look at water. We can have water in abundance. We can sell millions and millions of dollars of water. We can look at natural products that we can develop, or natural agriculture, and all of those things there. And so it seems to me that we can do a lot of things with that. In other words, if you had all of this going, if you create full employment, basically by if you were able to buy all the farmers' products and convert that into use it as raw material throughput to convert other products for export to nations that really want some of those natural organic products, it seems to me that we could have a lot of peaceful environment there where everybody's working and people, they're so busy getting wealthy that they don't have time to commit crimes. So,
that's the key. That's the key.
So, gentlemen, I want to thank you so much for us being here tonight, and thank you, students, and thank everybody. Good night, everybody.
Good night. And Dr. George, hopefully that's not the last time. First time, hopefully not the last. Bye-bye.
Nice to meet you as well. Thank you.
All right.
Good night.
All right. All right, folks.